Today I'm speaking with Dick Deaker. Dick began his working career as a deer culler for the Forest Service in 1964, and in the decades since his name has become legendary in New Zealand aviation circles. He's done it all from fixed-wing deer recovery in his Tiger Moth to live grizzly bear capture in Canada. This interview covers just a small snapshot of what Dick has done in his life, but hopefully gives you an insight into where he came from and some of what he's achieved. I hope you enjoy this interview, and if you did, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and maybe even drop us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Cheers. It's quite nice to be down here. It was a bit of an accident for us being here with Mark's funeral. I mean, you know,
it was an accident that I'm here too, because I was going to be away for a couple of months in the winter.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, I didn't know Mark. I've never met him, but it was nice to be here for it and to come along and, you know, respect the guy. So, yeah, he was obviously a long-time friend of yours.
Yeah, well, his brother, Gary, was a real good friend of mine. He originally came here from Auckland and worked on the Milford track. And then Doug Jones set up Game Collection Limited here in Te Anau, which, and he had Gary as an agent to buy deer, ground shot deer. And a lot of guys were using jet boats and Land Rovers. There was a lot of deer around.
Anyway, it's great to talk with you, and you're one of the sort of the modern legendary names in New Zealand aviation. Yeah. You've done a lot in your life. You've achieved a lot of real interesting things sort of aside to the flying as well, which I'd like to have a chat about. But I just want to run through a couple of early facts to put in perspective of where you came from, because part of these interviews is to try and inspire people to go and do things like you guys have done, you know. So you hated school so much that you said you only went to eat your lunch.
That's correct. Yeah, I went to. We were brought up in tough times, and I was born in 1944, and my father, we had 6 kids. He'd just come back. He'd been about 2 or 3 years in the Middle East, in the war, and big family, 6 kids. 3 of us were I'm the oldest, and the 3 of us under 3, and 6 of us under 9.
Wow.
Nappies. Brought up in a state house in Northeast Valley, Dunedin. They had to grow their own vegetables. My father used to bike to work. He was a cabinet maker down in a little factory down there in the Dunedin railway station. So he'd have to bike to work and bike back home. I know he worked, most times he worked 5 days a week plus Saturday mornings. I know out of 2 of those days, a Tuesday and a Thursday, he worked he worked till 8 o'clock at night. But that's after biking to work, and then he'd come home, and there's 6 kids there, and things like shoes had to be. He had to repair them on a little shoe thing, and also he had to, the vegetable garden was an important part of our upbringing. And
I mean, we think times are tough now, but no one would ever be down to biking to work and fixing your own shoes.
That just, in quite a wee ways too. Yeah, but we're talking 6 kids, nappies, middle of winter in Dunedin, those horrible easterlies that come around, and all we had was an open fire in the house, a small open fire. But you never get warm around a coal fire, an open fire. You only get warm when you stand there over the fire. And there's 6 kids and mum and dad, and no insulation in the house those days. I remember it very, very clearly. And you'd go to bed at night, and your mother would come and tuck all the, make sure all the blankets are up properly on and all that sort of stuff. Always had our hot water bottle,
And they lived in that house for 62 years, was that right?
She spent her last night on this planet in that same house.
Wow.
And on those horrible northeasters with drizzle and stuff, and the curtains that you had there, you could hear gusts of wind, and the curtains would be going in and out like this with the gusts, so it wasn't even windproof, inside. Eventually, my mother bought the house. Mum was the Minister of Finance. Like Dad would come home with a packet of money, and I don't think it was a lot. Like it was something. I know when I started in the Forest Service, he was getting about £18 a week.
Mm.
But he'd come home. They used to put your wages in a little brown paper bag those days, and with a little slip in there, how many hours you'd done or whatever, and he'd give it to my mother. And I know my father never had any money on him at all, nothing. Like he didn't need it. And every day he drove past the Normanby pub, which used to be down the hill. I only ever saw him about Christmas time. Him and one of my uncles, Lindsay Breeze, he was a skin specialist in Invercargill, would turn up with 2 flagons of beer. There'd be 6 of us kids there, and Lindsay and my mother's sister with him, and Dad would have a few glasses of beer, and I think I got my first taste of beer when I was about 10 years old,
Because there's a lot of stories about guys getting the little brown envelope and spending it all on, booze down at the pub, and then Mum gets virtually nothing.
Certainly not with us. We were sort of, Dad couldn't afford to. He had other priorities, and that was bringing his family up.
Yeah.
And of course, I was, being the oldest, I probably was the naughtiest too, because I was always out for a bit of adventure, And one day I was with one of the locals here, a guy, Alan Court, and there's a lot of gorse, a big face of gorse I think it's called Signal Hill. There's a big face of gorse there. Anyway, Alan and I were mucking around we might have had some fuchsia bark or something, and we were going to make a cigarette to smoke. And we were about 10 years old. Well, as it transpired, there was dry as, and the gorse took off. The fire started. When it really got going, they had 9 fire engines up there, 4 cop cars running around looking for whoever lit the fire.
And you were running for it, were you?
No, I was long gone.
Yeah.
And so was Alan. He went home. I went back home, and my mother, and she knew I was down in the backyard, and she said to me, Richard, she said, do you know anything about this fire? Who done it? No, Mum, And because it was only a wee fire we lit, but once it got in the gorse, we couldn't put it out, so we're off.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that's one of the bad things I did. And
one of the many.
But we used to have rabbit stew about twice a week because it didn't cost anything. Dad has he used to take us hunting a bit, about twice a year with an uncle. We'd go to the Blue Mountains or even up to Mavora deer hunting, and Dad used to get rabbits. And then when I got about 12 years old, he let me go and get rabbits. And Mum always wanted always about 6 rabbits because there was 6 of us kids and them. And I actually quite enjoyed it. I liked it, sneaking up on a rabbit. And
did you have an air rifle or a 22?
No, 22. Till 22s. A BSA bolt action 22, of which one of my brothers has still got to this day, the same in just little V sights. And I got pretty good at stuff. I'd shoot most of them in the head because it was no good shooting them in the body.
Mm.
And once I got half a dozen, I'd come home with them and gut them. I'd have a skin them and gut them out for my mother. And that went on for several years. It was my job to go and get the rabbits, being the oldest in the family, But I enjoyed the hunting.
Yeah, I think you said you just couldn't wait for the holidays so you could go hunting.
Oh yeah, but that come later. When I got older, my father took me to Haast, and I guess one time with my uncle. We crossed that Pleasant Flat Bridge and went on the other side. We had to get a permit. There was a deer cullers camp just down from the gates of Haast Bridge. There was actually a deer cullers camp there, and you had to pick a permit up there. And this is my first trip away doing deer with a deer for deer, and I would have been 13 or something. And we went across the main Pleasant Flat Bridge, and we set up a camp just in there, in the bush there. We were in a Morris 10 car. There was 3 of us, Dad, me, and my uncle, and loaded up to hell, roof rack, all the stuff there. And it was so exciting getting into the mountains. I'd never been, I had to be about 12 or 13 years old.
And
I
did
couldn't
you get
believe
given a gun?
the mountains, and I thought, this is marvellous, And when we stopped and we got in there, you could hear stags roaring. It was in the roar at night, in the evening, Anyway, he gave me a 303. He showed me how to use it, and I went through the bush and into a clearing, into a gravel riverbed there, and there was a deer standing on the other side of the river, and I actually shot it. I shot it for meat, and I went back to them, and they gave me a hand. We took some meat back off it, and that was my first deer I shot. I guess I was 13 or 14 at the most,
You were telling me yesterday at the Wapiti Cafe that you got 6% in one of your school exams.
Yeah, history, my last year.
And I think you got 30% in another, so school
32 I got 32% in school cert in English, and if you didn't get 30, you failed that. And when I did school cert, it was my second attempt at it, so for 2 years. And the principal of the school was a guy, Tom Hislop, and his comments about me that Richard appears to have given up hope. and I've showed that to a few people that are teachers today, and they said, "Oh, you couldn't be able to put that down now on a thing. They'd be after you,
Yeah.
But anyway, I took this. I remember taking this report. I got it. They give it to you, and you take it home and give it to your parents. Well, I didn't give it to my mother for about 2 days. I would have been 17 or so then, and she said, "Where's the report? Your brother had one." I said, "Oh, I left it at school or something, And when I gave it to her, I still remember she was angry, man. She was angry. She said, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time at school. We send you to school to get an education and all that, and everybody else is doing fine, and they all go to university and all that sort of stuff." My mother went apeshit at me big time, And,
what did she want you to be for a career?
Well, my father reckoned a good job for me would be to learn a trade and woodwork trade, because most construction was done out of wood then, no steel, including all houses and big buildings, all in the early days, all wood. And and then he took me down and introduced me to a guy I knew who was a wool classer, because wool was a big thing in the late 50s and 60s. It was very lucrative. Farmers did well out of wool. To be a wool classer. So I spent about a day with this dude somewhere in a big warehouse full of wool and that, and I just was not interested at all. And we've got to go back to my report anyway. But because when I was at Takahe High School, I always used to sit over near the window, and the classroom was facing north, but out to the west, where you look at the west, was Takahe Airport, and it was the only airport in Dunedin. I'm talking 1959, 60, and that was Dunedin's airport, but there was no airlines. There might have been a DC-3 or maybe a Friendship, but the Antarctic program was based out of there, and there was Neptune airplanes and DC-3s, and they used to go from Takahe to the Antarctic. And when they took off, they used JATO bottles, so they went off with a hiss and a roar,
Wow.
And they're very noisy. You'd hear engines winding up, and then you'd hear sort of not an explosion, but you'd hear this jet noise, and you see smoke coming out the back of them, and they were lifting off, and I've no idea what the DC-3s had in the way of fuel capacity, because that would have been a long journey from there to the Antarctic, Also, there was a few people who had private planes like tiger moths and chipmunks, and doing aerobatics on that around there, and I spent a bit of time looking out the window and that instead of listening to teachers, So consequently, even to this day, I do read a few books, but I can't read and write properly. I can't. If I wrote one line of words, there will be at least one of those words would be not spelt right, because I just wasn't interested, I wasn't.
And I read that exams, you've always struggled with exams, even getting your pilot licenses and things like that.
I've got to tell you about the pilot licenses too. Well, when I did my private pilot license, the theory, and it was only a basic little book, I used to cart around with me in the Murchison Mountains and up the Shotover one winter, just to read it. It's only a small, just a private pilot thing that you read, and I failed that first time, the written one. I failed you had to have a radio license. You went up to, failed the written of that. And then I went, when I did my commercial with Tim Wallace, myself, Jim Kane, and Alan Duncan, we could shoot deer with a private pilot license, which we did. The government changed the rules and you had to have a commercial license. So us four guys had to go, and Tim organised for a private tuition in Nelson at Rutherford Hotel, actually.
To get all his pilots through as quick as possible.
Well, four of us, including him. Well, we had to have him. We couldn't shoot deer. He had 4 helicopters sitting on the ground for months. I had something like 1,600 hours helicopter time when I did my commercial flight test with a guy that Don Sparry told me, the guy that's going to do you, I still remember him telling me, I was in a Hughes 300 at the time, Don said, he'll probably ask you to fly if he can have a wee fly himself after the exam. He said, and don't let him, Dick, because he said, I went with him the other day and he's actually only got 80 hours total time, he said, and he just shouldn't be flying, like he said he's bloody hopeless, because Don was ex-military, from the British military, and which I didn't. He did ask me to fly it, and I did said to the guy, I've been told that don't let anyone else fly it, so you better get hold of Don. So he never did fly it, but he had 80 hours of flying. I had 1,600 hours. But Tim and I had to, we missed one subject each. Alan Duncan and Jim Kane had to go back to school in Wanganui, I think, for a couple of months stint anyway, to do most of the things again, because we were all pretty thick. Like we struggled even with the private tuition, and probably weren't interested because we'd all done hundreds of hours of flying.
You could fly the machine.
And we got and all you want to do is get back hunting, because we were into the deer business big time,
But I find it interesting that, you can bomb out at school, you can get 6% in English or history. Your teachers say you've lost hope, but look at the career you've had. I mean, it made no difference,
but I've fallen into it a bit, and I always loved deer hunting. See, deer in the 50s and 60s were actually, the deer skins were worth about 15 shillings, a skinned out red deer without any holes in it. And we used to go to Manapori in the school holidays, a few of us guys, including Barry Eaton there, and we'd go back with 3 or 4 skins each. We'd only be there for 2 or 3 days, and they'd just rolled up and into a sack, put them in the back of the NZR bus, catch them. And those that would have had 303s each, you just put them in the luggage lockers with everybody else's suitcases and stuff, in a bus. Like, we're 16-year-old, and we'd make quite good money just out of the the deer skins and the tails. Deer tails were worth quite good money. I used to sell them to Robert Wilson Neal, and you'd get sort of between 10 shillings and up to £1 a tail, a deer tail.
Mm.
And the Forest Service provided 3 rounds of 303 for a pair of ears. So you got all your ammo back.
Yeah.
So
can I go back a step? At 17, you told your parents you were going to teachers' college.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
but you actually jumped on a bus and went to Mossburn.
Right. Yeah. Well, anyway, they filled in the paper. They had to sign the papers because all me mates. I had a whole lot of mates about the same age. The education system went around canvassing kids that were about to leave school. Just done their school cert or their university entrance thing. They would come down and they'd talk half the class into to go and get come and work for us, we'll train you up and you'll be a school teacher and good pay, lots of holidays, all this sort of stuff. Anyway, with a conversation with my parents and my friends around, we're going to college. Richard, you should go there too. Richard, you should go there. Oh, okay. Then so I filled all the paperwork in. I still remember it had to be signed by at least one of your parents that you were going to do this, you see. So I gave it to my mother, and I think either she signed the bloody thing or Dad did. It was anyway. So I handed all that in. So and it all goes into the teachers thing, that you've applied to go to teachers college, Anyway, I phoned up the Forest Service. Actually, that Max Kershaw was in for the Forest Service. He's a senior forest man anyway, and well known back in the 50s and 60s. And he was canvassing for deer colours, I went down to this meeting in town.
Without telling Mum? Without
telling them what was going on there. And I just liked what I heard, Anyway, I had a yarn to him and he said, even though I was 17 or so, and I probably only looked like about 15. I was sort of quite a wiry guy. I used to, win the bloody cross countries and stuff like that they had. Anyway, I went along here to talk to him. He said, get on a bus and come up to Queenstown. So I go up there with before that, I'd actually done a few trips into the West Matuki and up the Reese and the Dart and shot a lot of deer with my brothers, in the school holidays, the August school holidays. Actually, one of my brothers and myself and Barry Eaton, in the heads of the Dart, one of the rivers up there called Snowy River, it saddles with Loch Nagar. And the 3 of us are still alive, we swear to this day, we counted one mob of 102 deer, wild deer, but they were about, how we counted them, they were about 500 or 600 metres away, and they'd saw us, seen us, and they're way up in this, and there was still a lot of snow sheets around, and 3 or 4 of them would go, leaping through these snow shoots. I know exactly, even to this day, I flew around there a bit. And there's 4, and there's another 2, there's another 5, and it come to 102. And we're up 3 guys are still, and they finished up. They finished up in the head of Loch Nagar, but we never went near. But they're all gone, like they were outrunning us, big time,
So you jumped on the bus and John von Tunzelman was your field officer.
Max Kershaw, and he got me, and he had to talk to me, and I filled in some paperwork. Well, buddy, I'm going to put you on a bus down to Mossburn, and a forest ranger's going to pick you up there, and it was John von Tunzelman. And you can go around and talk to him. He's got all these marbles, and you can tell him all that sort of stuff. So I got on the bus and I finished up on Mossburn where the post office is there, just along from where that big fuel station is there. Still there, the building. Anyway, the people got off the bus, the NZR bus. and he didn't see anybody that looked like it's got a deer colour there, you know. But he did see this looked like a schoolboy with a pack and a rifle, a 303, you know. But he thought, you know, nobody signed this guy that Max sent down to him. Anyway, eventually he found me, and he found it was me, you see. But he took me into the Takahe. See, he'd tell you that about a day later in the Takahe Mountains up the Aparima River, actually, up to. I still remember that first day because I was quite excited going in the mountains here. Heading in a little short wheelbase Land Rover he had, and he took me to the hut and he showed me how to light a fire, which I already knew, and how to you know, always keep your wood and look after your food and that's there. But about a week later, and I'll get him to tell you this, or a week or two later, he left me there, and he came up about 10 days later to see how I was getting on, because Max Kurzweil must have phoned him up and said, that school kid I sent down, I don't have much hope for him. I don't think he's going to get either. And he told Max Kurzweil that, he said, geez, he got more deer than all the rest of the guys put together. He said, he can't have, you know, they didn't believe it, you know. Anyway, he'll tell you that, because he thought that I'd just go into the hills and I'd bloody die, you know, because I've just letting a young boy loose, you know.
Can I read a paragraph out of your book that John wrote?
Yeah.
So
when
he first met you, he said, okay, this is going to be interesting. Straight away my thoughts were that after 3 or 4 weeks, he'd be home to mum. I quite honestly didn't think he had a show of making it. Anyway, I took him straight home to where we lived in Mossburn, introduced him to Aloma, that's his wife, is it?
Yeah.
Who gave him a bit of lunch, and then we're off to Redcliffe Creek. He was painfully shy and wouldn't even look Aloma in the eye. Anyway, we set off right round to the other side of the Takitumus, as there was no road over Blackmount Hill. We had a newly built tent camp up at Redcliffe Creek. We had to walk the last 2 kilometres or so and had to cross the river to get into the camp. Of course, we always just waded in, but I looked around and here's Richard sitting on the bank taking his boots off. I told him if he was going to do that every time he got to the creek, he wouldn't get anywhere. Oh no, I don't like getting wet boots and socks, says Richard. Well, the tent camp was just a few hundred metres on the other side, so we go in and immediately he starts pulling stuff out of his pack. One of the first things to come out was a great big cake that his mum had baked for him.
That's right.
Next was a hot water bottle.
That's right, yeah.
This just reinforced my belief that he would be home to mum inside 3 weeks.
Yeah, true story, yeah.
How long did the hot water bottle stay for?
I still carry one around. I tell you, you go into a hut, especially in the winter, and, I know, but I wouldn't pack one in the hills probably these days. But I had a shitty little bloody sleeping bag. I couldn't afford anything else, you know. They didn't give me any money. You could see through the sleeping bag in the middle of bloody winter. But at least you always had a fire going. You put a billy on there full of hot water. You fill the bloody hot water bottle up and roll your bloody sleeping bag up in it. This is when you're in a hut, you know.
Yeah.
And when you went to bed, it was nice and bloody warm. And you'd stay warm for a few hours, and then you'd freeze for the rest of the night. I know what it's like to freeze from about 2 o'clock in the morning on, and you can see, and it's icy outside and all that, and you're bloody shivering and trying to get to sleep. I know what it's like. But the hot water bottle, you couldn't light a fire at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, but at least you got a reasonable night's sleep out of it.
So everyone else is probably a bit jealous of you.
They just saw us as a sissy. But I'd still probably, I haven't got one here, but I have used hot water bottle in the last month or so, actually, if there's one around. If you go into a cold bed and there's no power somewhere, you know, I've got a sort of a sleeping kit, you know.
I've got a bit more to read from John.
Yeah, I've read it all a few times.
He was incredibly fit. So this is John talking again.
Yeah, that's right.
To give you an idea, one winter Friday, I had arranged to pick Dick up at Princhester Hut at 4 p.m. and take him out for the weekend. I woke up this day and there was a good fall of snow on the ground.
That's right.
I knew that he was going to be at Whare Creek Hut, a little
Warry
hut.
Creek. Warry, yeah.
Warry Creek.
Warry Creek, yeah. It's on the way south. Warry Creek, yeah. Warry Creek's down near Redcliffe Creek.
Okay.
It's way over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking there was no way he'd get from there to Princhester Hut, which was a long way through the snow.
It was about 2 foot of snow that morning. I can remember that morning very clearly.
Okay. 60 years ago, is it?
Yes, over 60 years ago. 65 probably.
I thought that I'd get as close as I could and give him a ride. I got to the hut, but too late. He had already gone. The tracks in the snow told me that he had headed off for Princhester. So I thought I'd head off for Roundtree Creek and intercept him there.
Elm Tree Creek.
Sorry, I might have written that down wrong.
Elm Tree Station, yeah.
Oh, yep. We had a little hut there that was actually Elmwood Station Hut.
That's right,
So
yeah.
you're right. It was all printed out again. Here's the tracks coming down the hill towards where the key was kept
marks,
at the old woodshed, and then the tracks heading away again towards Princhester. He had obviously stopped in for a brew and a bit of a rest. I was staggered that he had got so far in that time. There was nothing else for it but to head for Princhester. When I arrived, I set about lighting the fire and putting on the billy, and sure enough, within half an hour, in walked Dick. He had also shot 4 deer on the way. He was quite happy it was just another day for him.
You see, 4 deer was worth, because I was getting £2 a deer, so it was worth £8. Most of my friends, when they went to work as apprentices and different things, they were getting between £4 and £5 a week.
Wow.
Well, just on a trip like that, I made £8 in one day.
Mm.
Well, I'd get paid £8 for one day,
Yeah.
But I was enjoying it. I loved it, and
but you had no training for that. You were just pretty much
nothing.
sent
You
into
don't
the
need to
bush.
train. It's all about survival. Survival. You got to and plan ahead and be careful. I was always careful.
Yeah.
You remember I wasn't flying then too, because I did tell my mother and father I was going to fly one day. I'd love to fly, airplanes and that. And I said, that's a dangerous job. You shouldn't even, that's ridiculous, flying. Because most pilots those days were Air Force trained. And because when I actually learned at Takahe, and it was £2.10 for an hour for 150.
You're jumping ahead.
Hey? Yeah, I'm jumping ahead. Yeah, right. Keep going.
So in those days, am I correct in saying that the deer couldn't be sold? You were paid by the tail.
Yeah, we weren't. Yeah, we weren't, because there was a little bit of meat hunting going on those days, but you had to have a vehicle to take them to, like Sir Gary Hollis's Culler, which was up the Upakara River here. But we would. Yeah, I spent most of my time in the mountains, way up in the mountains. Yeah, you couldn't. There was.
And you were just paid by the tail. You would collect the tail.
Yeah, it was a token.
Yeah.
Token that you had to keep off. John would explain all that.
Yeah.
But there was no helicopters around those days at all.
And you weren't actually allowed to shoot with other people, was that right? You had to be by yourself because they saw that as being much
that's
more
right,
efficient.
and I didn't mind that. I enjoyed every bit of it. You'd get a wet day, and then you'd get 3 or 4 fine days. You'd go away up in a big head basin there, and you'd see a deer sitting down away over on a ridge there, and then you look through. You had a scope and look through there, and there's another 2 or 3 there, and you planned out how to get them. You'd cook your own food. There was quite a few little huts in the Takahe, but they were only about 4'6" high. You couldn't stand in them, just bivvies.
Mm.
And there was always a family of mice in the huts. And I used to cart a mouse trap around. And that's after you got settled in the hut, you empty your stuff out, and you put a billy on the fire and that, and you see a mouse scuttling along. So you'd use peanut butter, put it on a trap, and within 5 minutes you caught the first mouse. was consistent like this with huts. You'd catch the first mouse, you'd just set the thing and you put it there and you'd go outside, you'd take something out of your pet and you go bang, and, oh, I got one, Well, I tell you what, by the time I went to bed at night, most huts had between 7 and 9 mice in them that lived in them.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, the last one was always the hardest to get. And you might get him about 2 o'clock in the morning because you'd be sound asleep, you bang, and because he'd been getting a bait off it. I've seen them, watched them, nibbling away at the bait, nibbling away, but always the last one is the cunningest,
Yeah.
You always got the first 4 or 5 within an hour, and then it took about another 2 hours to get another couple, and then you still knew there was one around. You could hear it rattling around somewhere, and they'd be early in the morning. The trapper would go bang, and I've got him, and then you knew you got them all, But each hut, and then you go to another hut about a week later, you'd be in a different little hut. I'm talking way in the head valleys of the Aparima River. You'd be in another hut, same deal, But it was actually sort of like a form of entertainment, how to outwit these little furry 4-legged bloody menaces,
Yeah.
And
it sounds like
you got to remember I was only about 18, 19 then,
Yeah, but
so I had a weird sort of a hobbies, I like shooting deer and killing mice,
Sounds like you ended up a pretty good hunter and pretty smart. I mean, Jeff Carter, who you've shot with for
but that's
decades.
later in the helicopters.
But he said you had a photographic memory and a sixth sense for finding deer in the choppers.
Yeah.
Kim Hollows said you're a master hunter and got more deer than anyone else, and you obviously learned all this back then.
Yeah.
But another thing Kim said, which I thought was interesting, he said, Dick taught me a lot, that you don't need eyes to see, you have to have vision.
Yeah.
It was about curiosity, finding things all the time, like where the watershed of a river begins. Dick tuned me into all of that. So you were obviously a bit of a thinker back, when you first started and learning how it all works.
I didn't like reading books. I couldn't write. I never, I was hopeless at school, but it was all about survival too. Like I knew I could never hurt myself real bad, otherwise no one will ever find me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I showed Kim up in the Murchison Mountains, not far from Lake Isles, where one day I'd sort of take a shortcut across this is when I was in the Murchison Mountains. I'd spent over 500 days and nights in that Murchison Mountains, with the Takahe area,
Yeah.
And one day I thought, instead of having to go back down the valley and up another valley, there was a bit of a ridge, and it was about a couple of 100 feet vertical drop, and I thought if I creep along there, but I got halfway along this ridge, and at the widest, it was wide as that little table, but there was places here with the rocks jutting up there, and I looked down here, there's about 200-foot drop that side and about the same there, and I had troubles turning. I had a pack on my back, and I had trouble. I jammed myself into a corner where I couldn't even turn around. I had no climbing gear or anything. I just relied on and a rifle over my back and my pack. And I remember hanging onto this rock and looked down here. It was 200 feet just vertical and down. And I was having trouble turning around. I couldn't turn around. And I tell you what, it taught me a lesson. I probably spent 5 minutes there. I didn't panic.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, hang on here. I'm not going anywhere, and have a think about this. Because if I had fell there, they still would never have found me. And I showed Kim one day where that was. That I could take you right there now, and I know exactly where it is,
And how'd you get
And I
out
tell you what,
of
it taught me a lesson. Never let yourself get into a corner that you can't back out of physically, which would involve your life,
So did you just get your way out of that slowly?
I remember eventually I managed to I might have had to take the pack off somehow and jam it here and sort of move only meter your feet away, you know,
Yeah.
and then get my pack and stick it back on. I'm on a vertical ridge like that, and it was all to save me about a 45-minute walk. Like I should have gone down the valley and up the other side here, but I thought I'd just cut across.
Mm.
And it taught me a lesson about decision making, you know.
Yeah.
I'm talking when I'm 19 or 20 years old, you know. And I didn't get a fright at the time, but I knew I was jammed in a place that and if I had have fell there, nobody would have ever probably no way that anybody would have found me, you know, where I was, you know.
Teaches you to be responsible for
Well,
yourself, doesn't it?
it just became a and eventually when I got into flying, this is before I was. No, it wasn't before I was flying. I'd already had a private pilot license, but it taught me discipline. It taught me discipline and decision making. How can you could die. It's easy to die. You know, like especially when you're out on your own. There's no help from nobody. You know, I'm no longer mummy's boy. You know. I'm out here in the big world, you know, and it really taught me. It taught me a lesson, but that trying to save a 1 hour deviation, which was safe, and by going, I thought it was a shortcut, but I tell you what, it taught me don't do that again. You know, never do that again in your life. You know.
But you said these ground hunting years in the Forest Service were, without a doubt, the happiest years of your life.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. In Fiordland there's always 2 days a week, roughly. You get weather like this, and you'll be stuck in a hut somewhere because you'd already done 2 or 3 big days out. And there was quite a lot of deer around those days. Evan Brunton and Peter Brown and those folks, we used to shoot between 120 and 150 each a month, on foot, you know, and, you know, like every day, there wasn't big mobs in these places, but there was always 2s and 3s and 4s. Every now and then it'd be half a dozen, but the 2s and 3s and 4s all added up, you know.
Yeah.
You got 2 or 3 in a gully here, and there's another wee gully way around here, and you go up over the top and you look down another basin. Oh, there's 3 or 4 over there.
All of a sudden,
and you
it's
just
a dozen.
worked out how to get around to them. Sometimes it depended on the wind. You had to go the long way and get around there, and sometimes I can still remember now, deer, they'd be sitting on a ridge somewhere or at a head basin looking down the hill, but they're too far away to shoot at, and so you'd work out, if I go way along here, it's going to take me an hour or two and way up round the back and into the back and then way up and over the top of the ridge, and you can come back there 3 hours later. It might take you to get around there. You look down and those deer are still there and they're looking where they last saw you. They saw you walking around the way down here, and they're still looking. They're still looking down there where you disappeared to, and when you fired a shot at them, the rest of them, they'd all start running towards you because they knew that the last place they saw you was down there. Most of the food net was all dropped in those days by, especially in the Murchison Mountains, by Bill Black did a lot of the original airdrops out of Dominies. And John Von Tunsman was the man that kicked them out the door. He's the one that pushed them out. They'd give you a date. They'd say, we're going to, the first fine day after, Monday, and they'd say, well, yeah, can you be at the top Ettrick Hut? And we'll talk to, this is next, in 2 weeks' time, they'd tell, in Peter Brown, and they'd tell them to be in the snag hut, and you'd see where the airdrops went, and it was quite a big day picking them. There was always fresh food in it, fresh for like spuds, but a lot of stuff. They had wee parachutes on them.
Yeah,
they didn't work all that good, but they did slow things down, and they didn't get damaged. And a lot of tin food,
cigarettes.
No, not me. I've never had a cigarette in my life.
Is that right?
Yeah, not
Shit.
one.
You'd be the rare person.
I'll
like
tell
that.
you right now, I've never had one. Yeah, that's a fact.
That's why you're still around.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I'll tell you one thing. I've actually been getting through the bush and just smell cigarette smoke. Oh Jesus, you know. And one of them was one time with Errol Brown up at Lake Ross in the Milford, in the Clinton Valley, in the Milford track. He said, oh, I went up one side of a Neilburn and he went up the other. And when I was coming back out, I didn't see him for hours. You know, he was up looking around some bluffs for goats, so you could hear him shooting the odd goat. And then when I got down near Lake Ross before we got to Glade House, and oh, geez, I smell cigarette smoke, you know. So he's not too far away, you know. And here he was sitting on a log having a smoke at Lake Ross, and I'd be 100 metres away from him, and I could smell it in the air, yeah.
And you never felt like you wanted to take up smoking?
No, but a lot of those guys did.
Yeah.
No, I saw no benefit in it, you know. I hardly ever had a beer. Like some of my first beers in a pub, I was 20 with Max Evans, and it was 21-year-old drinking then. And so I didn't drink. Well, we were never brought up like that. My parents didn't. My father, they never drank, you know.
Mm.
Or he did. He did once a year. You see him have a beer with someone. But
yeah. You talked about watching the aeroplanes from Taieri, and you did it. You set your PPL twice.
When I got a wee bit of money, I used to go and see my parents, and I think I told them I was going to start learning to fly. And I still remember going out there, and the only instructor was a guy, Hugh Skilling.
Mm.
And he was quite well known in the day. But anyway, one of the flights we did before I went solo was we went out to where White Island is, out off St Clair, and we're doing stalls. He showed me how to do a stall, and we got into a spin, and it was either BYL or CGI 150. And CGI was the one that was stolen many years ago and put in a lake. It was the same aircraft, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're out there, and he's doing it, and he got it. He said, "I'm going to show you how to get out and get out of a spin." So we were up, way up high there, and he showed me how to do it. And he said, "Right, it's your turn, you know." And there's not much room in those bloody 150s, you know. It's no wider than this here. And two of us are sitting in there, and he's a grumpy old bugger, yeah. Anyway, I screwed it up, the recovery of the spin. So it was, instead of using my full pedal and pull them forward properly, one of them I didn't do properly, you know. And he went apeshit at me, and we started an argument, and I would have been, well, I will tell you how old I was then, probably 19 or so, and he said, "You're wasting my fucking time, and you're wasting your time. I don't know why you want to learn to fly, you know." He said, "You're bloody hopeless, you know." but at this stage, I'd done about 3 or 4 hours, you know, like, probably with him. And I still went solo on 7 hours, you know, which everybody else did.
So
know.
he obviously didn't put you off.
Hey?
He didn't put you off.
Well,
flying.
he was just he was a good instructor, but he didn't have. You know, we've all had good instructors and bad instructors, but he just had. I don't think he wanted any, because he was the only instructor there at the Targa Aero Club. He was the only one, and he had at least 1 or 2 days off.
So you went solo in a Tiger?
No, Cessna 150.
Oh, sorry, Cessna 150, and then you went into the Tiger after that.
When I bought the Tiger Moth there, that's the day I bought it, that photo up there, I didn't have a rating or anything, but I did do 2 hours. The guy, Bob Burns, was doing part-time instructing at Taieri at the time, and he spent 2 hours with me. I told him I'm going to buy a Tiger Moth. I got one he said, you can fly it, if you're on your own and you own it, if you own it, you can fly it. He said, you don't need a rating, because Bob couldn't give me a rating for some reason. And he said, you fly it good. And he said, and you can legally buy the Tiger Moth. You don't need a rating. So I'll tell you about that shortly. So, but this is about, I had to do compulsory military training. That took up 3 months of time at Burnham, January 66. So I had 3 months. I didn't mind doing the compulsory military training, but I saw it as a waste, because I'd been in the Murchison Mountains shooting deer, making good money, mainly because I work hard. And here I am locked up in here showing out it was all about discipline, and about a third of the male population those days had to go in it, the way the ballot system was.
Yeah.
Interesting. You wouldn't get away with it today, but they had one toilet in Burnham for soldiers. One toilet, one big building, and it was about 20 metres long, with all the toilet pans, and you sat there talking to the guy beside you, and all the rest of them down here, the whole lot of you, they'd be early in the morning, there'd be, there's no cubicles or nothing,
Yeah.
And on the other side was all the showers, and it was just one big building, just with showers, no nothing. So you're walking around there in your birthday suit. But anyway, and it was all about
Birthday suits.
Well, yeah, but with the showers, if you're having a shower, there was no.
You wouldn't want to be a bit self-conscious.
Well, there was none of that. Well, the discipline it was all about discipline.
So just getting back to the flying, there was a little story you met Ian Ritchie and did a beat up in a Tiger with him.
Yeah, well, anyway, yeah, that was before I had my private license, and I went for, he had his Tiger Moth here, where the airfield was here. And after he went away and we did a few circuits, he said, I have control. And we went, and we came right down the main street here, and there was that big blue gums down where Real Journeys is here, went right through them and around and past where the float plane was, because he had a float plane then, that one that Bill wrecked up in that gun, right on the deck. So we went right down just above the power poles, down Tiana Main Street here, and around and along and past the float plane thing there. And it was quite common for people to fly around low level.
And were you thinking, this is bloody awesome, I need a bit
Oh,
of
yeah,
this?
I was quite a bit of, but I was always nervous low flying. When a lot of guys say that they like their low flying, but I was always a wee bit nervous about it, because it was quite not unusual to see that an aeroplane crashed near Belcouth and 2 local farmers were killed.
Yeah.
And they only bought it 3 months ago, or he bought it 3 months ago. And my mother would say, "Hey, dangerous thing,
Didn't she say you'd be dead within a week?
Yeah, well, that's that day there, that same day when I bought that thing. I bought it in Invercargill, and that's a bit of a story on its own too, because I had trouble starting it. I couldn't start it.
This is Alpha Indy AIW.
AIW.
Yeah. So you bought it for £400.
Anyway, I went down. I had to go to Invercargill to go to the post office savings bank and get £400 to pay for it. So I got this cheque for £400, and I go down there and I go down the airport. And anyway, I paid for it. I didn't have a rating, but I'd done a couple of hours in a very Tiger Moth, and I had no chocks for it. Anyway, I didn't even know about chocks then, and because most the planes I learnt and had brakes, hand brakes,
Yeah.
Anyway, I couldn't get it going, because I hadn't done much practice. A little bit, about 5 hours in a chipmunk too, a little bit of hand swing and carry on. Anyway, and they showed me, you got to pump the throttle again a little bit, and just a bit more throttle. They showed me all that stuff, like a tyre, So I tried all this, and I'm out there on my own, just near the control tower there, and I go out there and I got pump it a bit more, the thing, the throttle, and then go around and really, go out like this. Anyway, it took me a few minutes. I tried again, a bit more throttle, and next thing it barked into life and it off, heading across the runway. And that day, the same day as that photo was taken at Takahe, but we're talking Invercargill. This is Invercargill.
Yeah.
And thank Christ I was fit. And I run around the wind and Betty grabbed the throttle and clothes. I still remember, I still remember. Look, I'd only paid for it about half an hour before, £400.
Had you
No
insured it?
insurance, no shit, no insurance, no nothing, no radios, no nothing, Anyway, that was a scary bloody thing, That taught me a lesson too, about life, And when £400 is a lot of money, and no young kid, buddy, owned an aeroplane when he's 21 years old, And then I took off. I phoned my parents up and I said I'd be up about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Takahe Airport. My brother Bill happened to be with them, and he had a camera. That camera that took that photo. And I landed at Takahe Airport, and Mum and Dad, I said I'd be there at 2 o'clock, and they're waiting, and I did. And I landed there, and I taxied up beside them, and I got out, and that's the photo there, the same day that the plane almost took off on its own. Anyway, I got out, and Mum and Dad were there, and my mother was, because she did all the talking, because they were very disappointed that I learned to fly. And when they heard, Bill must have said he's just bought an airplane, Mum and Dad. We've got to go out to Takahe. So she got out there. Anyway, I got out of the plane, that photo there, and I walked over to my parents, and Mum and Bill took a photo of me, and she wouldn't even look me in the eye. My mother wouldn't look me in the eye.
So she wasn't proud of her son at that point.
Oh, no, shit, no. And Dad didn't used to say anything. He'd be standing behind her. And she said, she had her hands down beside her side, and she's looking at the ground, hard down to the ground. She said, I'll never forget it. Richard, you'll be dead in a week. That's what she said. Wouldn't look at me, just like you to me away. You'll be dead in a week. She told me that about 2 minutes after that photo was taken. I tell you what, I never forgot it. When she told me that, I'd be dead in a week. By then, I'd already been around that cliff face in Lake Isles and stuck up there, and I knew what it's like to look at death, And when your mother tells you you're going to be dead in a week, there's 6 of us kids, and I'm the oldest. You got to sit up and take. I got quite a shock actually. It didn't say, oh, nice aeroplane, or was it a bumpy flight, or anything. Just that you'll be dead in a week.
There was another, probably a bit later, a couple of months later, you were flying from Gore to Taieri, and you got caught in a bit of a southerly.
Yeah, and it's actually, I think I got a shitty letter off the Ministry of Transport.
You got into trouble with the civil aviation.
Yeah, well, it was Ministry of Transport then.
Yeah.
About a badly planned flight plan. Well, I didn't have any flight plan. Well, I did actually. I allowed an hour. But it was a beautiful day at Taieri, but there was a nasty southwest front coming, you see. Real nasty one, actually, because it was like it was today, raining, but it was wind to go with it, a horrible southwester. It took me 2 hours to get from Taieri and I was getting past Clinton, down near Clinton, and I was down to about 500 feet, and I was following the roads. Well, about not far before I got to it, I could see this big wall of bloody cloud in front of me, and I could see the road, the highway there, where I'd been up and down. Because I had a Mark 1 Zephyr, I think, at the time, and I just followed the road along. I got into this, and it was windy as hell, southwester. It was probably blowing about 40 knots, I reckon, or thereabouts. But like I left Taieri, it was beautiful. But this big wall of cloud, I sort of turned around and gone, oh, another lesson that I learned in my life.
There's a few lessons coming your way.
Yeah, but I tell you what, I never did them again.
Yeah.
You believe it, you know. Luckily, I normally owned my own aircraft, so I was a free bird, you know, whereas these days if you hire a plane or something, there's always someone overlooking you and say, oh, you can't go there, the bloody weather's shit, it's really going to be... But anyway, I got down there. I still remember getting past Clinton and these old Morris Miners and Austin A40s and old cars, you know, like back in 66, you know, and they're heading down towards Gore too. And they were going faster than I was because you'd see them getting down the road, the odd one, you know, and then you'd see them disappear. And I'm heading to Gore too, you know, but I'm way behind them in a strong wind, you know. When I got down there, I don't think I might have done a circuit around, and it was real windy and raining and blowing like a gale. And I came around, I landed in a nice wheel landing, but then I couldn't do anything with the plane because it was so windy. I couldn't turn it. I was trying to turn it to taxi into where the Aero Club building was, and I couldn't. And there was a whole lot of it might have been a Saturday or Sunday, and there was a few guys at the Aero Club there, and I still remember because you can't turn them in strong winds, tie them off, and they come running out. There's about half a dozen come running out there, and they're hanging on to my wing to help me and walking with me back to where the Aero Club was, and they said, "Oh, you got to get on the phone. You know, you're overdue, and the tower's been ringing up, and so there's a plane in the air that's missing." It was 2 hours. It took me 2 hours to get from Takahe to Gore. You could bike, a good fit man could bike down there quicker, you know.
So what did the CAA do?
No, they give me a letter. They accepted my story that I told them, but they said you badly planned it and all that. Well, I didn't plan it, did I? You know, I just filed a flight plan and I'm out of here, you know.
There was a story about, I mean, I imagine with the Tiger, it must have been easy to overload it all the time.
It was all trial and error for me. I had no one to talk to except Bill Black, and he didn't tell you a lot. He wouldn't even tell me how to do a flick roll. I had to work that out myself, you know. And I took John Von Tunsman with me a few times, and we chucked big boxes of ammo out up in the Plateau Creek up here in the Murchison Mountains, because I used 2D2 ammo. I didn't use 303. So I had to supply my own ammo. Had a 2D2, similar to a 2D3. They had 303 ammo there, but I didn't use that. I used a 2D2. They were sort of the newest calibre out and very accurate up to a couple hundred metres or more, you know.
Yeah. So
John Von would go with me and throw the boxes and bits and pieces out as we'd slowly go past this. And I'd see exactly where they landed because I'd walk through these places a lot. And it's just near that bush over there, you know. So
there's a bit of a story with you and Sid and Gary and a couple of deer at Shirker's Bush.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you nearly killed yourself there.
Well, there's a photo there of me taken off somewhere, but not here. It was the three of us, and we were camped down. We had a Land Rover down between the lakes for it. There was an airstrip down there, and a nor'wester had come up, and it was okay for taking off on that Shirker's Bush airstrip. But just after I took off, I had my brother Sid and Gary in the front, and me, and I think we might have had a couple of sets of back legs so we had quite a load on board.
Mm.
And I just got off at the end of the airstrip. It was a nor'west starting to pipe up, and I was taken off into wind and slightly downhill. Got off the ground all right, got flying, but that was it. So, and then if you know that area, the Upper Mavora, it's just a gradual stream. It's a good fishing stream. And we'd gone about almost to Bush Creek, which is a couple of miles up there, and I was still only about 100 feet in the air, you know, full throttle. And I still remember Gary and Sid were in the front. You got to remember, we're 20. I'm 21. Sid's 17, and Gary's a bit older than me. And I still remember, and I had a helmet on with goggles on it. They didn't. And he could tell that the engine's going like hell, and the tussocks are still going past us, you know. And another lesson learnt, you know. And we'd probably gone about 3 miles up the valley, and I knew I've got to stick hard to the left here, but I need at least 200 to 300 feet before I even think of really doing a turn, you know. I needed more height, you know, a northwest blowing down the valley, and it would all been downdraft, and I wouldn't have got to 400 feet. I was up about 300 feet, and I thought, and a wee bit more airspeed up, and I knew that it's about, I've got the whole valley, got a good valley to turn around in, but, you know, and it's full noise, the old engine's going flat out, you know, and eventually, you know, like in the turn, you definitely, you'd lose you lose height, you know.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it was 3 of us on board. Like, I would have been overloaded without a doubt, you know. It's not till after it happens you realise you've done something stupid and you're in the middle of it, but you've got to keep going and no one there to help you, you know.
It's like being on that cliff.
Yeah, and you've got to, but they're things that you'd never do again, you know, like you always remember. And that's why people like Russell Goodstad, he's still alive today. Yeah, he's done about 30-something thousand hours, started top dressing a Tiger Moth. But those guys, they never forget these things, you know, in your flying career. If you make they weren't mistakes because I survived, you know, but and you didn't tell many people, but you certainly were you did something stupid because there was no one there to talk to about stuff like that those days. You had to learn yourself, you know.
Yeah. And the thing is, if you're out there doing so much, the amount of flying that you were doing, you're going to end up in these situations.
I never did it. At this stage, I would have had maybe 150 hours total time, which is not a lot, I guess, when you look at it.
And when you look at that these days, someone with 150 hours is nothing.
No, that's right.
Experience.
Yeah, but I had no one. But I was very good at learning by mistakes, you know, it took me 3 or 4 huts in my first few weeks of working for the Forest Service to work out there's between 7 and 10 mice in every hut. And by the time I caught 6 or 7, I knew there's more around. I'm going to get them. But
how did we get back onto the mice?
Hey?
How did we get back onto the mice?
Well, I'm just talking about decision making and things, you know.
Yeah. There's another story that there was a fresh slip in the North Fjord of Lake Tiania, and you put some grass seed in the tiger and went and sowed grass seed to attract the deer.
That was out of a pipe of super cub.
Okay. You couldn't do that these days.
Yeah, but you won't believe it. That slip, I could show you where that is today, and it's none there now. It's just native bush.
Yeah.
It's all just native bush now, and it's 50 plus years old. Actually, it's 60 years old.
So did the grass grow?
Yeah, well, what it did do for a few years, but then the bush took over and everything.
Yeah.
And it's just, if I pointed it out today, you would never know that it was a big slip there, you know.
Mm. So you had the tiger for a couple of years, and then...
Yeah, I did about 200 hours in it, roughly.
Yeah, but then apparently either the plane was going to go or your fiancée was going to go.
No, I had to get it. When I got out of Murchie's here, Murchison Mountains, one trip, I found out my partner was pregnant, you see. So, and John Vaughan, Tunsman, and Max Evans, they bailed me out because they knew I was getting a lot of deer and I was bloody into it and bloody airplanes and mucking around. I was living the bloody dream, you know. Well, at one stage I had a motorbike and a Mark 1 ZF and a Tiger Moth, and I had a section in Worsley Street that I'd bought, I was going to eventually build a house. I'm 21, you know, and but I worked hard, you know. But I come out and they said, "Oh, you know, you've got to call home. Your partner's going to have a baby." I said, "What?" You know, really. Anyway,
That wasn't in the plans.
well, no, that wasn't in the plans. But you're going to have to change your lifestyle, Dick. You know, like you can't keep doing this all your life. You know, you're going to have to get a house and all that sort of stuff. You're going to have to get a different career. You know, like this is good while you're young. You've been going good. We're happy to have you and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, that's just after 3 or 4 years or more. Actually, 5 years, I think. Yeah, well, I finished up buying a house in McKinnon Loop, 81 McKinnon Loop, and I paid £1,600 for it. But it was just a little house, no bigger than what you got here. I only had 1 bedroom. I didn't have all the money to buy it,
But you
a
sold
house,
the Tiger.
so I had to sell the Tiger. So I sold the Tiger to an American, and this American paid me £800 for it. I got a certificate of airworthiness halfway through when I owned it. It had 15 months left and it needed a certificate of airworthiness. And I took it to Timaru to get done by a guy, Harry Sederman. I don't know whether you've ever heard of his name.
No, I haven't heard of him.
And one of his apprentices there, a guy by the name of Alan Mincher.
Oh, yep, I know Alan.
And he was an apprentice there. And his boss told him, "I got this young fellow coming up here and this Tiger Moth needs, it's got to be C of A, a new C of A." So I landed up there, and Alan Mincher to this day will tell you he couldn't work it out. This young fellow, he looked like a schoolboy, should have been at bloody school, and he hops out of this Tiger Moth in Timaru, you know. And it was me and my AIW. So to get a C of A. Well, anyway, after about a month or 6 weeks, I got a new C of A, which included a paint job. And somewhere in my den downstairs is the receipt. It cost me £187 for a new C of A and a full paint job.
Did you have that cash?
Yeah, I did. I had £187. Yeah.
Mm.
So, and then I flew around for about another 6 months. Only when I come out of the bush. Bill Black used to fly it occasionally here. If I hadn't been in it for a while, he'd just take it for a quick circuit. Anyway, I had to sell it to buy this bloody house. So this guy, this old timer, I never ever met him. I took the plane to Torrey, and it was boxed up and sent over there, and it's in a museum at a big golf course in San Jose. And it's at a golf course and a big aircraft museum, and it's still in there to this day, I believe.
Wow. So you sold the Tiger and you bought the house, but then it wasn't soon after you bought another aeroplane.
Well, what happened, I was going to go fishing, and a guy called Murray Schofield used to be the chief ranger here. Anyway, he took me and Peter Brown's brother, Errol, who's still alive here today, into coming to Chatham Islands with him and fishing over there, dry crayfishing, you know, about 1968. Anyway, I quite enjoyed it. We went out, we took his boat out, the old Kauai from Port Chalmers. We off to Chatham Islands on a shitty day like this. Our navigation equipment was very basic those days, and it was quite a good sea, but you could never get. Murray was the chief ranger. He retired, and he had all these sextants and that, and we were waiting to see a few stars so he could get a bit of a fix on where the hell we were, you know, out here. We're heading to Chatham Islands.
A long way away.
Yeah, and especially in a boat that's getting along about not much more than walking pace, you know.
Yeah.
And off we go over there. And luckily it was quite a reasonably calm, you know, a wee bit of a sea. I still remember it quite clearly, you know, because, you know, we're going day and night non-stop, you know, and puttering along, you know. Anyway, I stayed with Murray and them, and we came out, Errol and me, and we did trip around, Murray go home for a few days and Errol and I would stay there fishing, catching crayfish, and we'd come back in a Bristol freighter.
Oh, right.
A Bristol freighter back to Christchurch or Wellington, it might have been there.
Yeah.
They had a pod they used to stick in it for a few passengers,
Yeah, I've just interviewed Alan Graham, who flew Bristol freighters for a long time.
When I came back from there, I'd still go meat hunting, or I'd shoot on the lake with Gary Hollers. We'd go up to Worsley or Camp Bay or down the Hollyford, and I'd make real good money for about 2 or 3 days, shoot quite a few deer, and you'd get real good money for venison, Anyway, Tim Wallace came and see me one day and said, "Are you interested in getting an airplane?" I said, "I am, but I had to buy a house. The wife, we got a new baby here, and I've got to." It sort of skinned me out. I put another room on the house and done the place up a bit. It wasn't a house; it was an old batch, He said, a friend of mine, we've set up Game Collection Limited. We can get them, there's a lot of guys getting Piper Cubs and they're doing all right away up there, and there's nobody down here. There's a few airstrips around the place and all that. He said, I'll have a yarn to Doug. And next thing Doug got in touch with me, he said, because there was a Piper Cub for sale up in Auckland. And he said, I can pay for it, And they said, we can finance it for you. So I had a good think about it. And I agreed, and they lent me $5,000. It cost $5,000 for this Piper Cub, and it was sort of 6 out of 10 cosmetically. It had quite a good engine in it, or a good engine in it. I never ever had any trouble with it, and I did quite a few hundred hours in it, maybe 600 or 700 hours.
And what was the Cub like after coming from a Tiger?
Well, the time I was 27, I had Cessna 185 rating, and I hired out a bit, bits and pieces, but it was good, it was good, and I took on the easy airstrips to start with. It was quite a big commitment because we had a young kid. It was Mark, my son, and then there was Glenn. I had a couple of young kids, so I sort of had a bit of responsibility. But it was quite good money if you worked hard. You had to work hard, and it was hard yakka. Mm. Every deer had to be packed out, didn't matter where you were, And of course, Peter and Earl Brown and John Pearson, they built an airstrip up the heads of Upuk, and they flew a lot of deer out of up there. But eventually they didn't do any, and it probably got too expensive. They had to hire Mount Cook. So, but no one was working up there, and I'd go there about 2 or 3 times a month. I'd just go up there for a night in the morning, shoot 2 or 3 in the evening, and another couple in the morning. Sometimes I'd get 2 loads, put them in my Cub and fly out. And I was making pretty good, I was doing very well. I paid old Doug off within 2 years. I owed him nothing, and for the Piper Cub.
Yeah. And did you head over to the coast a bit, up into the Pike and those places?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, when others weren't there, they'd pull out of there because of the cost. I'd forget the demise of Sam. I think he was killed in a motorbike accident, actually. Mm. There was a lot of places people weren't going to in the finish, which I went into. I used to go to the Rockburn a bit, the Forgotten River, land there quite and Olivine and the Barrier, the upper valleys that no one went to in the finish, nobody. I'd be the only one to go in there for the season, and I'd go and get 4 or 5 deer in these places for a night in the morning.
Yeah.
And I'd come out and I'd make more than most people would ever make in a week just for one night in the morning. Mm. And I didn't do a lot of flying. Like I'd do 40 minutes in there and 40 minutes out.
I made a bit of a list of guys that were flying Cubs at about the same time as you, but there weren't many over in Te Anau, were there?
There was none, just me.
So there was Tony Hawker had got out of it, gone on to choppers.
Yeah.
There was Jim Finney.
Yeah.
Ian Wiley.
Yeah, I knew them all, yeah.
Sax.
Yeah.
in the Oster.
Yeah, well, I used to take Sax down to Alabas before he knew how to fly anything.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a good story about that. About it several times I took him down there. In fact, I've got to tell you about it. And Sax, I know he's dead just now, but he's one time it was him and a guy, Gordon Anderson, and Gordon Anderson allegedly shot a moose. About it's got to be about 1970. The news is out there. A guy shot a moose in Breaksea Sound. His name's Gordon Anderson. And he's going to bring the moose head out in a float plane. And you probably know a wee bit about it.
This is Spunky.
Spunky Anderson,
Spunky.
Gordon Anderson. Yep. Yeah. Anyway, I don't think the moose ever turned up. Well, the head didn't turn up. He was a likeable dude, a bit of a rebel.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard he tried to burn the Parks Board headquarters down. He sprayed petrol all around inside it, a jerry can full of petrol. But he either had wet matches or something. He couldn't get the fire. He couldn't get it going. But I reckon if he had, he would have blew the whole show up, including himself, with petrol. But I knew him quite well. Anyway, one time we're down here in the pub having a drink. Weather was shitty. My airplane was down at, I left it parked overnight down the Hollyford airstrip. And Sax says, oh, we want to get back into Alabaster. Can you take us down there, Dick? And we 2 or 3 loads. He said, and Spunky Anderson and me, you know. So off we go. He's got all this food and that in the back, and me and Spunky were in this short wheelbase Land Rover, here, live in town here. And before we got out of town, we went over some lands and survey paddocks. We run down, it was either 2 or 3 sheep. We chased them around and Spunky bulldogging them. I still remember this as clear as. It's what the hell? He said, oh, I'll take these down too, and I'll take some sheep down. I always take sheep in there, live sheep in there to and they had it all organised because I'm with them because I'm going down there to get my plane. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll take you. But I didn't do it. Normally they would go on a plane day, which is a Tuesday, and it might have been Friday or Saturday or something, you know. And they'd have binding twine, and they'd had it down to a fine art, having Spunky, and they'd tie the sheep up with binding twine. Anyway, we had 3 sheep. It was 3 sheep total, that's right. Because a Piper had not a lot of room in it compared with a 180.
Yeah.
So we get down the Hollyford airstrip, and we got these 3 live sheep that we'd stolen off the Lands and Survey. I actually didn't wrestle them down. Oh, Spunky had it down to a pretty fine art. And they'd cut one off and then Spunky would get out and run it and grab it and get down tied up and chuck it in the back of the well deck in the back. And with all the rest of the stuff. And down we go. And we're having a few beers on the way while we're driving down there. It'd be in the middle of the day or late morning. We get down the Hollyford airstrip. We put 2 sheep in the back of the Piper Cub and another sheep. And lo and behold, if a Ministry of Works truck come round to the top of it and over, and it was Colin Brown. He was the, lived in town here. We all knew him well, you know. And he come up and he parked about 20 metres away from the aeroplane. And it had the sheep. They would just put the sheep in. The first thing you've got to go down there is the sheep, you know, because they've been tied up by now for an hour, you know, tied up like this, you know.
Yeah.
In there, they got to go down first, the first load, you know, because otherwise they'd die, you know. And all I had to do was cut the string and let him go there. And that was his meat. They'd keep him going for another couple of months. So he's living on Lands and Survey mutton. But anyway, Colin Brown comes around, and Dave Sax happened to have he had one of those old army greatcoats. You don't see them around now, but those big old army greatcoats. He had one on. He had one on, big, you know, way down here, made out of heavy duty wool, you know. And he chucked it when Colin pulled up. Oh, yeah, go on, boys, you know, what are you doing? And said, oh, Dick's about to take off, go down down to Alabaster Forest, and we got this load here. We'll have a yarn in a minute. We'll just get Dick on the way there. But as he could see him coming, he just smoothly took this army greatcoat off. Dave did, and I'm sitting in the plane ready to start it up, and he tucked it over the sheep. You couldn't see sheep.
Yeah.
But it was tucked over the sheep. And I'm in there, and Colin's about 15 metres away, and he didn't know there was sheep in there because I only put in there about a minute before he turned up, because he would have gone back and told Donald Chartis or somebody that these bastards had sheep, you know. Anyway, I couldn't start up quick enough to get the hell out of it, so I took off and went in, landed at Alabaster, lit them out, and then I came back, and he was still there yakking away for them.
Wondered where you'd
Colin.
gone.
Oh, no. Because I had about 3 trips to do with all the tucker and stuff. I had to take Saxton with one lot of stuff and fuel, and then Spunky in with another lot. You know, like if Colin, but he turned up quarter of an hour before, he would have seen these sheep, and it would have got around the pub that they got sheep, and they got Lands and Servo air tags in them. And
hell would have broken.
But that was typical of a mission with Sax, and Bill Greenslade would be able to fill you on a lot of other things similar, you know.
Yeah. So that's Sax. Then there was Howard Smith and Noel Boyd, Simon Green, Mike Bennett, Rassie, Jim Shewan. These are all Piper Cub guys. Frank Wright, Bill Greenslade, who bought your cub.
Yeah.
Were there issues when you were hunting areas with the cub and there were ground shooters in the valley? Like,
I never went near the place if I knew someone was there.
Was there a wee story with Dale Hunter up the pike?
Yeah, with his horse. He wrecked my bloody... He didn't deny it. I was parked up there for the night, and I shot some deer up the valley, and I'd come back, and I had my sleeping bag and that underneath or just near the plane there, and a tent, and I come back and the bloody place was wrecked. And I could see smoke coming out of the hut way down there. I said, what the hell? You know, he said, my horse would have done it. And I know bloody well that he took it there. But
did he think you were sort of poaching on his
yeah,
ground?
Well, I wasn't, because I had a permit off the Forest Service. John Vaughan knows all about it. And they said, you can go there any time you like. If they're not there, I'd just go hunting there, you know. Like, if they're not there, it's all government land, you know. And it pissed me off a bit. Yeah, I generally kept well away from places if people have been there or even heard about them being there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go near the place. I'd go somewhere else. I could, only quarter of an hour away, and you could go into another valley somewhere.
Just want to talk about the Grebe a wee bit, because you built a strip up there. Can I read a bit out of your book?
Yeah.
Gary Hollows and I marked out where we would lay out an airstrip. This is up the Grebe. We took in some grubbers and picks and managed to clear about 100 metres by about 6 or 8 metres wide.
That's right, yeah.
The hunting was excellent in the Grebe, both on the flats and in the bush. Plenty of deer, and they hadn't been shot up too much. While we were building the strip, we shot quite a few deer. Gary Cruikshank had offered to fly over in his 206 float plane just to check us out.
Yeah.
When he did, he could see all these carcasses alongside the cub, so he knew that we were shooting deer as well as digging the strip. The trouble was we couldn't get off again with the deer until
we fixed the strip.
Yeah, until you'd extended it. It took a couple of days, but we finally did it.
All these dead deer lying out there, and the Piper Cub, and a tiny wee airstrip, not even as big as a football length of the football field, and there's no way you would have got off with any more than 1 or 2 deer. It was just very, very short. We needed to get about another 50 to 70 metres, because we're grubbing away flat out. We threw the grubbers out of the plane.
Oh, okay.
To start on the first lot, the first little bit that it dug.
Then you said we eventually managed to get a strip of around 150 metres.
Yeah, that's right.
I did really well in the Grebe and took several hundred deer off that strip in the years that followed. In those days, we used to burn the tussocks as well as digging them out.
That's right. Had big bonfires. At night, there was no helicopters around or bugger all. Bill Black and a hiller, but he could have been up Hollyfoot or somewhere, you know. But about half an hour before dark, on a summer day, the tussocks were nice because you couldn't see all the sort of the heads and necks. The tussocks that long. About half an hour before dark, after we'd shot a deer or so, or two around the place, the old matches out.
Just light it up.
And the whole valley would be bloody glowing and smoke, you know.
Wow.
But it didn't at night. But by 11 or 12 o'clock at night, there was nothing. The fires were all out because of the moisture in the air. You know, it was always damp in the morning, but in the daytime, with the day, you know, warm day breeze, you wouldn't get away with that today.
No,
Holy
you wouldn't.
hell.
For quite a long time, I had the place to myself in this area. Mike Bennett, Howard Smith and a few others were operating out on the coast, but I was the only one here, so I had a huge choice. And you had an accident up the Grebe.
Yeah, me and Sid. I was greedy. I was trying to. I paid $5,000 for the plane. I had it about. This is when I had it for about a year, and I took my brother Sid in there, and we shot 4 deer. And it was in the summer, and always by about 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, there's always a day breeze coming up the valley. Nice wee day breeze about 10 o'clock, you know, for taking off. I had 4 deer. So we put the 4 deer in and Sid, it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, earlier, you know, and it's still calm. It was calm as. And there was a ditch at both ends of the strip, like a natural ditch, and like quite a deep ditch. And I said to Sid, oh, we'll give it a go and get out of here, eh? Anyway, you know, I knew about it was a silly thing to do, but not at the time, because I'd taken that amount of deer off before, you know, but always when there's a bit of a wind during the day, like not much of a wind, you know, like enough to blow a match out, maybe, but enough to just, you know, more than walking pace, you know.
Yeah.
And anyway, he got halfway down. I got to sort of the point of no return on the strip. Well, not very long, and I knew, and I said to Sid, "You better hang on," you know. And I got right to the end of the strip, and the tail was up, and I pulled on full flap, and I got across the ditch all right, but then it took the undercarriage out, and well, we finished up. I finished up doing quite a bit of damage. It cost me $5,000 to fix it.
Same
I paid
as what you bought.
what I paid for it. I didn't have it insured or nothing.
Oh, right.
Anyway, about an hour or two after, because I said to Sid, we're going to have to walk out of here. No one's know. Which we did, walk out the road. It took about 2 or 3 hours or more. The road that goes into the Grebe Valley. Anyway, but about a couple of hours after all this happened, there was this beautiful breeze coming up the valley. If we had waited for that beautiful breeze coming up the valley, we would have been, right, well, there's another lesson learned, you know.
Yeah.
Just being, let's go, you know, let's go. You know, there's a lot of people are dead today because let's go, the weather, you know, and they kill themselves in bad weather, you know.
Yeah.
I should have known better, you know, because that would have been in the early 70s.
Mm. Did someone helicopter the plane out, or how'd you get it out?
I had to pull it to bits, and Bill Black was working up that one, a hiller, and we helicoptered it out. He took the wings out. I think the body out first, and with the hiller, and put it at the road end. It goes down into the Grebe Valley. I don't know whether you know where that is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and but anyway. You know, everybody makes mistakes. That I want to finish up with the biggest black eyes you ever seen in your life, because those bars on the Cub, my head came forward. You know, you get a bad knock up here, man. You got to get black, and it got slammed against those struts that come down on the Cub.
Yeah.
And I finished up with a couple of big shiners for about a month. You know.
You couldn't pretend that something else had.
Oh, no, everybody knew about it.
There was another story up the Forgotten with some Kias.
That's right, I got stuck up there. The weather coming real bad.
So this is a strip that Johnny Mac built.
Yeah, he originally, yeah, but he never went. It was when he finished there.
Yeah.
There was a few sheets of iron he had up just in a bit of bush there, and I stayed under there and I pissed down with rain, heavy rain, and poor visibility. And because a lot of cases, there was no forecast like you get today, and I didn't take too much notice of forecast because, you know, if you're worried about what it's going to do tomorrow, you get nothing done today, you know.
Mm.
Anyway, one day I never got down to the plane. It was probably only about 150 metres away, but it had been pissing down with rain and blowing a gale. And when I did get down there, all the trailing edge of the ailerons and the bloody back end had been chewed up by bloody Kias, you know, like all the trailing ends.
Wow.
You know, flapping around.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a good look at it, and you know, all the main wings were okay. The ailerons were all okay, but all the back end of them, all the fabric was just hanging there. So I decided to take off and head straight to Takahe, you know. I had enough fuel. Always had enough fuel to go to Hollyford 2 or 3 times, but I could go straight to Takahe Airport,
Yeah.
which I did. And it flew all right, you know, with the trailing edge, because there was a trailing edges that they'd eaten.
Mm.
I did minimise risk, but I've told you about a few incidents. And one was sitting on top of that bloody ridge and having a think about what I'm going to do now. You know, that's why a lot of people get killed today. They can keep going beyond.
Yeah.
You've got to make a decision. Do I go back or do I take the risk? And quite often it results in bloody death, I guess.
Something you said about helicopters on that line, you said a helicopter will kill you real quick, but you got to know when to back off. And I suppose it's the same thing with aeroplanes. It's the same with all of us.
You can talk to other people like Jeff Carter or my brother, Sid, or my brother Graeme, and they've flown with a lot of other pilots, you know, and a lot of them used to comment, not to me, but to other people, saying that we noticed Dick's a lot more cautious than some of the guys we've worked with, you know.
Yeah.
You had to be bloody cautious. There was no one there to bloody say no, you know.
Yeah.
You had to,
I suppose when you've got no experience, it's hard to know when to back off, though, isn't it? You don't really know that line.
Well, that's to start with, but a lot of them just kept taking risk in the finish. It was all about, a lot of it was about production.
Mm.
You know, I wasn't a risk taker.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of arguments with Tim Wallace over that about, he would say, he'd ring up and want to know how many deer I got, and he knew bloody well they hadn't been out because the weather was shitty. But he'd say, oh, the others did all right, you know, they went out this morning, they got a couple of hours in. But what he didn't tell you is that at least 2 of those pilots killed 4 people.
Mm.
But in the finish, at the end of each year, he always used to be happy and say, you know, the accountant says that your production was the same as the others, you know. So always, but you know, I wasn't a big risk taker, you know.
No.
But life's a risk all the way.
It is. You just got to know where.
We're talking about distractions, you know, like I was in one of Tim's HHK. I did about 4,000 hours in this HHK, a 500C, and it was leaking a bit of oil, which goes through a bearing and it burns it up, so you don't see any oil around the place.
Yeah. And
I decided to stop. One time I brought a load of deer out. Every 2 or 3 hours you come out with a load of deer, leave the guys over there. And I was going up the South Arm Tiana here. I knew I'd checked the oil and I put oil in it, topped it up. I couldn't remember if I'd put the bloody oil cap back on. The oil cap's on the other side. I'm on my own going back. And as I flew along, another minute or 2, no, I just can't remember putting it on, but And in the finish, it bugged me that much that I landed on a beach there, and bugging me days, it was hanging there on the end of a chain. It was off.
Oh, wow.
And I put my finger down the hole there, you can't see nothing, you know. But you always had a tin of oil under the seat, under the little front thing on the... So I poured that in the thing, and and there's still no sign of any oil. I went back, and I got back, and it took another 3 tins of oil.
Wow.
3, because it had sucked it out. Another minute or two flying, the engine would have seized, and going up the lake, I mean, nowhere to bloody land most places. But I just had that uneasy feeling that I wasn't sure. And I thought, well, I better look, you know, I better look.
Because once you know you've put that oil cap on, you know. But if you don't quite focus on it, you're always unsure.
You get distracted.
Yeah. Getting back to the Piper Cubs, what are your thoughts about, you know, all the modern, the mods we've got these days with the big bush wheels and the big long flaps and the big engines?
It would have been great.
Do you reckon it'd be great, or do you think it would have made it worse?
Probably made it worse, because you would have gone to sillier places.
Yeah, that's what I reckon.
You probably would have overloaded them even more.
Yeah, because when I look at what you guys did, it's pretty hardcore. I mean, you're doing stuff that no one does today.
That's right.
Without all our gear.
And did some stupid stuff too.
Yeah.
We landed it, there was an airstrip at the mouth of the Kakapo Valley, and we shot 5 deer. They were just yearlings. They weren't big deer, you know. So we put the 5 yearlings in, and Gary lay on top of the deer, and then Sid creeps in there, and Eli's on top of him, and then I hop in. So we go up the end of this airstrip there, and the ocean's just out here, a bit like at Karamea, you know, and we only just got off. I was around at the south end of Martins Bay, and I was still only about 500 feet up in the air. And I got up to about 1,000 feet, and the old cyclic, or whatever you call it, it's hard forward, you know. I've got a hard forward, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, this is stupid, you know, but we're here and we're getting along. And I'm going into this Hollyford airstrip. It's still about a mile away, and I started a gradual descent, and I'm running out of this here, and I knew I had to keep my airspeed up, but I started a descent well back, and kept my airspeed probably up about 60 knots or so, you know, we landed okay. We got down all right, but I know I thought about it later. If we ever had an engine failure or something like that, we were going to die. We were dead. You were dead men. Yeah. Especially when you got 2 guys sitting beside you and their heads are right here. Your CG was not an issue. You know, if it'll fit in, you kept putting it in.
Yeah.
And Sam Becker stuff used to fly like that in the 180 they had.
Okay.
He would bring loads in. You wonder how the hell they got the last ones in the door. You know, like. You know, out of Alabaster and the Forgotten River, it was just chock-a-block full of stuff.
Wow!
But he always had shorts on,
yeah,
and a t-shirt, and you'll never see a spot of blood on him. But there was a lot of blood around those days. You know, like just putting them in and out, he got covered in blood. But not Sam. He just stood back and he smoked. He just stood back having a smoke, watching everyone else do the work. You know.
Tell me about the first ride in a chopper that you ever did.
Going into the Sinbad Valley when I was about 20. I was working in the Murchies, and it was in the winter, and the internal affairs were going in there. There was Kakapo in there. Anyway, they built a little bivvy in there halfway up the Sinbad Valley, which is on the left-hand side of Mitre Peak, because there's a sharp valley goes in there. Max Evans, a forestry guy, said, got a helicopter coming over there and it's going to fly some building material in there if you could go in and give them a hand. And I said I would for 2 or 3 days. And they flew us in with one of the loads. With the Bell 47, lots of that photo that I showed you. And I just strapped the stuff on the side. And that was the first ride I've ever had in a helicopter.
Okay.
The second ride I ever had in a helicopter was with Tim Wallace. He picked me up at the neck down up where there. I flew up there, my piper cub, he said, I want to have a yarn to you, Dick, about possibly working for us. And he met me there at the neck, and we're going across to Minaret Station. He was going over in a hiller to lift some fence posts for the owner of Minaret Station. He didn't own it then, you know.
Yeah.
And I still remember him getting across there. As we're getting across, said, "Oh, beautiful farm, let's Dick over here at Minaret Station." He said, "Dick, I'm going to own that place one day. I'm going to own that." I still remember him saying that. Yeah,
Wow.
I was in my early 20s, you know. I'm going to own that place one day. And then he took me down to Nockamai Station. We caught some deer down there. And it was snow and ice, the coldest, most miserable place I've ever been in my life, up high. And these deer were trapped in a head basin. They just stood up there. So you go and sit down about 200 or 300 metres away, and there'd be about 20 of them up there, and you could see these two deer, and they're wobbling around, and they're with the mob, and the next thing you see them fall out. Yeah, okay, the drug's working, I'll take you up there, and start tying them up and put them in sort of baskets. But I never did it as a job. He just took me with him because he knew I could fly, and he knew I was onto deer. I started training when Tony Hawker was killed. Tony Hawker?
Yep.
When he was killed, that's when Tim decided he'd get me.
Oh, so you sort of went on straight after that.
Yeah, well, because
Tim paid for all your training.
Everything, yeah. I lived in a Royal Oak Hotel for 3 months. I'd go home on the weekends because we had a couple of young kids. And but I'd be there for 5 days.
So once you went onto the chopper, did you do virtually no shooting after that? Your life's changed because your whole life had been shooting up until then. So that
that's
must
right.
have been
but I was still with the deer, but no shooting.
Yeah.
I used my brother and Gary Hollers as first shooters, you know.
So that must have been a real big change for you.
Well, yes and no. I was still involved with bloody deer, but no shooting, you know. And I'll say this about Tim, he looked after us well. He paid us well. If you're good at the job, he would reward you well, you know. And at the end of each year, he give us all bonuses.
So your first commercial job was in a 300, and you had a little bit of a learning curve with running out of gas.
Oh yeah. That wasn't a commercial job. It's after about 70 hours of Don Sparry. I didn't run out of gas. What happened is they were going to teach me how to. Don was going to teach me how to shoot deer.
Yep.
And to ferry deer out. You know, like I just finished all my training, all the stuff and all that, and then I was signed off with a private pilot license. But I'd never done any deer shooting with a helicopter. So, okay, I had to go away. They get the truck up there to up near Paradise or further up the valley, as far as you could drive up there, Glen Orkney, with a couple of drums of fuel. And off we go, me and Don. I'm doing the shooting, Don doing the flying. So off we go, and we shoot these bloody deer way up the Dart.
Great excitement?
Well, yes and no. It was a learning thing, you know. And I wasn't nervous. I'm not a nervous sort of a person, but we've shot the deer. So Don, he goes away and he land. Okay, we're now going to pick them up. So you hop in the pilot's seat, and you take me to pick all these deer up, one by one. You know, of course, Don quite a bit older than me. And probably never done it much, just when he's trained people. And so we go and we pick them up. But a lot of them, they weren't on flat land. These things are on the sides of hills and slips and shitty places, you know. And I drop him out and he'd be stumbling around up there because he'd never done much of it. And he's stumbling around, he's taking a strop with him and stuff and get over the first deer and hook him up, you know. And then he can't get in the helicopter because it's too bloody steep, but there's about 20 metres away there'll be a little bit of a knob. So I'd sort of point out over there and I'd give him 5 minutes to get around there before I could pick him up, and then we'll go and get the next one. Well, we effed around that much, picking these bloody deer up. We mucked around, and then I had to gut them out, and then Don says, well, I'm going to hook 5 deer underneath you and take them out to the... I'm looking at the fuel gauge. I said, we've got to get going, Don. The fuel's getting low. Anyway, I took off with this load of deer, and I'm getting along at about 50 knots down the bloody valley, and we're quite a way up the Dart, and we're well down on fuel, and I'm looking at the fuel gauge, and I've been through all that stuff since in one of those things, llamas in South America. When the fuel gauge is getting low, you'd be surprised how many times you look at the fuel gauge, because you you've got to believe it, but you don't want to believe it. And you know that every time you look at it, even a minute later, there's less in the tank. There's never more.
Yeah.
And I'm getting down the bottom end of past Dredge Flat in the Dart, going along slow with a big load underneath, the joker waiting down there in a truck. I thought, well, I'm not going to make it where he is down there. It's already flickering, and I'm not prepared to take the risk of getting along with a low fuel light that's warning me that there's virtually not much left, and 5 minutes left in the tank, and I'm not going to wear that. So I got right to the road end, and the road end was still about 3 miles away from where this truck was, and shut off. So I shut off, and I started running. But it took me a while to run down there, and then we had to drive all the way up, and I think we might even had to carry some fuel to the helicopter on foot. Well, in the meantime, Don Sparrow's sitting up the tops in the Dart, because he kept telling me even up to when he died, he'd never forget it, because he thought he's probably crashed and killed himself, because Tony Hawk had been killed only a few months before.
Right.
When I eventually got up there to get to him, he wanted to know what's going on. I said, well, I wasn't prepared to fly it with the low fuel light going, telling me with 2 or 3 minutes' time the motor's going to quit, He appreciated that, we went and shot a few more deer. It was an exercise of shooting, picking up, and fearing out, that was an exercise.
And when you put that in with you deciding to land and run and get gas, I mean, you must have learned a hell of a lot that day. Because that could have
actually worried about it. By the time we mucked around, it would have took an hour and a half, because I had to run about 3 or 4 miles.
But that could have ended up like you on that cliff when you were younger, to save 45 minutes. You could have made that same decision in the helicopter. Oh, well, I'm close now, I'll keep going. And,
well, some
you could have
people
killed
do
yourself.
That. Some people do that. I know guys around here that have landed near a fuel bowser, and they've gone to waiting on someone else to fill up, and they've gone to try and move over. It was their turn at the bows, and the motor's quit before it even get there. There've been nothing in it, dry.
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared to do that,
When the live capture come along, that must have been like a whole new revelation. What was your first live capture experience?
Well, we were catching deer for Tim for quite some time. It was chaos to start with. It was easier to bulldog them if you could, but just with no nets or nothing. And eventually some guys started inventing a guy Wilson from Reefton. He made a net gun type arrangement up. They call it a gotcha gun.
Yep. And
it's in this net out there. So anyway, I go sailing off with him up the South Arm, and here's a deer way ahead, base head, and I got this thing that comes out like a big blanket, about half the size of this room, a net, and it comes sailing out and hopefully settles on the, falls down on top of the deer. Well, we fired off a few times. We finished up getting 1 or 2 anyway, but it was frustrating, like the equipment, the early equipment.
But it must have been exciting, trialling it all, and
yeah, but it was all about Tim was only interested in production. He wasn't interested in the ones you missed.
Right.
Like how many did you get? He didn't want to know, but he didn't know that that we missed a lot of shots that the deer had already gone away when the nets settled down. Well, you got to pick all those nets up, fold them up, and put them in the back. A lot of frustration in the early days. And we had electric stun guns too. Hannibal and I used them a bit. I used them a few times, and I wasn't having much success. But Richard Hayes was pretty. Him and Colin Yates got themselves pretty good with it. Basically, had to be sitting on top, you to me away, and put the thing. And it was 2 wires go into the deer, and down it would go. But it only had to roll over and pull 1 wire out and it up and running again, because the current stopped going through the animal.
Did they have their own battery, or did it run off the
aircraft
battery?
No, run off the aircraft thing.
Wow.
Through a voltage thing.
Yeah.
I can remember one big stag. We were up the Hollyford deer. We were trying to catch, and we finished up having 2 lots of darts in it, and either the electric shock didn't put him down, and he's running along, and he's got all these wires flapping off the back of him, and I'm getting frustrated. This thing's going like hell, and the bush isn't far away, and there's wires, and our needles are all stuck in his ass, And I thought, this is madness, like. And of course, there was people getting into net guns there, and the first ones I made had 3 barrels on them. Apart from that gotcha gun, they only had 2, but the next lot had 3 barrels, and then they become very, very efficient in the finish. And a lot of it was thanks to Nelson Thompson. He persevered with them, and but they had a very short range, like you had to be within 10 metres of the animal or less.
Yeah.
And you had to have them in a place which wasn't rocky or steep cliffs, because they'll try and get out, and they go over the cliff with the net and haul one and kill themselves. You had to try and get them in a desirable place, preferably not flat, because they can go like hell, but somewhere where they've got to climb up a sort of a shallow ridge, and they're not going to get hurt. Because they get injuries. If they tumble down in rocks, they get ruptured their guts. About 2 days later, they die. And when you have a look inside, they've been mortally wounded, but it took a couple of days. And of course, you get nothing for them, and you go into all this trouble. It was frustrating. It could be frustrating work.
Yeah.
And everyone was different. And sometimes you'd drop the guys out, and there'd be a bigger animal. And if the animal's down below them, or you might have netted it going uphill, but somehow or other they finish up. It's got its weight, and it's trying to get away, and they're trying to grab its legs, and you can't do a thing. You can just sit there, hear that little cottage away. You can just sit there and look, and you can't help. You can't do nothing. It's desirable to keep the noise nearby, because it keeps the animal
confused.
At the end of the day, you finished up with a few, but there was a lot of frustration too,
Yeah. I suppose you got a lot better as time goes on, and you worked out what worked and what didn't work.
Well, you did, and better gear. Nelson Thompson, he put a lot of time in developing good net guns, and that was quite important, and the type of netting. Like today, they've got fairly fine netting that's very strong,
Didn't you use to wash the nets in the washing machine?
Wash them, you had to wash the dirt out of them, because they wouldn't fly properly, because they'd be all stiff caked up with mud. Right. You had to wash them properly and hang them out to dry, A lot of mucking around, and you had to make sure the barrels were free, and they had O-rings on them, O-rings on the barrels, and having the right loads and the easy 303 or 308 bullets, taken out, and the right load. If you had too much load, they'd just about knock a guy's shoulder off, and mess around. There was a lot of thought put into it.
Yeah.
And then when you got the animal out about 1 in 10 often didn't survive, you know.
Yeah, so the trauma to the animal must have been huge.
Yeah, but they got that down to, you know, we used to be able to get the drugs quite easy then, romping and stuff like that.
After you'd netted it, just to sedate
Yeah, but you
it a
couldn't
bit.
leave them tied up too long either. You know, an hour or more, and they could die. They'd bloat up. You know, they have a lot of. They can build up a big gas build up in their stomachs and just chokes them off. You know, and you only got to have that happen a couple of times, and it pisses you off because you went to a lot of trouble catching them, and then the bloody thing dies on you. Well, you don't get paid for that, and it's no good for nobody. You know, you can't even feed it to your dogs. You know.
You had a couple of engine failures.
Yeah.
You had one up the Seaforth.
Yeah, one in the Seaforth, chasing a stag with Jeff Carter, HHK. I've had one or two other engine failures over the years, but with engine failures, there's usually no warning. You know, everything's going good, the noises are good, and we're chasing this stag. We were actually going to shoot it, and it was running along towards the bush. It was in the Tintail Valley, actually, and Jeff fired a couple of shots that have missed, and then we're not far away from it, probably 30 metres at the most. And next thing it didn't go completely quiet, but it went down to ground idle, you know, just ground idle, like you're sitting on the ground just idling there. And we're just getting along, next thing, and within 3 seconds, you hit the ground. You know, I put it on good.
You were only at a couple of 100 feet, were you?
Probably not even that. Probably 50 or 60 feet up, you know. So that was that. Here we are, we're sitting there, and it was sitting at ground idle. You know, I put it down all right. Didn't damage much. One skid I might have broke, I think. And anyway, and it's sitting there and it's idling, and it didn't matter where you had the throttle, open or closed, it just idling, you know, it's just idling. It didn't matter what you did, it was just idling. Yeah. So I had to shut it off as normal. And but it was actually the governor that failed, the governor. It just went back to ground idle. I knew where a hut was, wasn't too far away, you know. Now the Tintail hut on the dusky track. So we went down there, we walked down there, and we thought someone might have been looking for us later in the day, but by night time they realised I was definitely missing, you know. We didn't communicate a lot those days. I don't think we even had an ELT in the
You wouldn't have had
things.
any way to, would you?
No, nothing. No. I still remember trying to get to sleep in the hut, just in your clothes, you know. And there's not a lot to talk about, really, when you're sitting in a hut. You weren't meant to be there. And it wasn't until next morning, just on daylight. I knew them well that they would have helicopter. The next thing we could hear, and we had a fire gun, that's right. You know, one of the best things you can ever have, and I tell young fellas, even to this day, they've got sat phones, they've got all the bloody goodies. The best thing you can have when you're in the mountains is a couple of big flick lighters, cigarette lighters. There's nothing that sticks out more. You can look at those mountain ranges, even over there in the Venison Mountains. If someone had a good fire going over there, there's nothing that sticks out more than a little bubble of blue smoke.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
I tell you, you can survive around a fire, and it tells you there's human beings there, you know.
Yeah.
Like if ever I was going places, every now and then we go places we're not meant to be, and you be in a bush valleys, you know, haven't got a permit to be there, or it's closed or something, and you're up there up to no good, like looking for deer when you shouldn't have been not allowed in there. And you look away up the valley, you see a little ball of smoke. It was early in the morning. A little ball. We get the hell out of it quick, you out of here.
Yeah.
Because you know where the smoke, there's human beings there. And don't worry, I've been pretty good at that. You know, if you see smoke coming out, you're on some high country farm, and you're only out in the back of your face, you see smoke coming out of the chimney. If his hut might be 3 miles away, but it's, oh, geez, we're out of here, you know, but he's there, you know, the owner probably, you know.
And you had another engine failure up the Cascade.
Yeah, that was right, and that was a governor too, actually. No, the fuel pump. Yeah, it's still up there, bits of that.
Another low level again, obviously.
Well, I was right down low, yeah. And had a beautiful job putting it down, but one of the skids dug into a tussock bush, and it was a 300, and we finished up with it sitting on top of us. When he got out, I was with my brother Graeme, and nobody knew where the hell we were. I was meant to be at the Hollyford, There was no communication those days at all,
Mm.
And that's why you had to, you had to have some survival skills, like. Luckily, he never got hurt, and there was no one there to help you. Within a day or two, they knew you were missing.
Mm.
But it's pretty tough going after you've been gone for a day and a half and you hadn't had anything to eat either,
Yeah.
You get a bit hungry, But that's all our own fault because we never carted them up. But we always carried a box of matches and stuff, get fires going.
Sounds like in those days that hunting and flying just came before everything, including family.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree.
I've just got a few little things I'd like to read, something out of your book. The urge to fraternise with all other operators in the pub on days off was incredibly strong and not conducive to a healthy family life.
That's right.
And something that Mark said in the Hollows Boys book, he said, I'd say that most of the guys wouldn't have made good parents, wouldn't have made good fathers, because a lot of the time they were away, they were working, and when they came home, they'd let off steam and went drinking or would stay in places like Milford. Anyone who was in that game had issues. Life revolved around what you were doing. There were always crashes, funerals. If you had a shitty day, instead of spending time with your wife and kids, you'd go down to the pub. Yeah. It was pretty much like that, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah. And that was back even in the 60s, in the late 60s,
Yeah.
And it was pretty rough on relationships. There's no doubt about that, And when you look back, you've got to apologise. And it was tough going then too, like in a place like Tiana in the middle of winter, thick fog. I'm talking the mid-70s. You'd go up the South Arm and over the other side, and most beautiful days, 8 to 10 degrees on the tops, beautiful sunny on the ridges up there. We shoot deer all day. You come back and descend under the fog at 5 o'clock at night this time of the year and come back with a load of deer. And the morale was never very good at home. I can't get nappies dry and the fog's been here all day and it's cold and miserable and of course we've been sitting in the sun, not sitting, but we're working in the sun, and we'd, like you'd drop the boys on different places on the ridges, and while you're away for about 45 minutes bringing a load out, they'd say, "Oh, beautiful up there in the sun, I'm lying out there, buddy, there you go," and you come back down here, and it was like that for days on end, And of course, the morale at home was never that good. Then when the weather did turn nasty, we couldn't wait to get down the pub to talk about what you'd done last week,
When you look back now, all these years later, do you regret that you didn't spend more time with your kids?
Well, yes and no. I did look after. Yes, I should have. We should have done, I guess. I wasn't a bad parent, but I certainly wasn't a real good parent. My kids would tell you about it. Like apparently one time I took 2 of the boys, only about 6 or 8 years old, down the Hollyford airstrip. Well, I didn't forget that they were there, but they were there all day swatting sandflies, about 6 or 8 years of age. And when they got home, they told their mother, "We never saw Dad all day. He's away shooting deer in the helicopter, And we just stood around there. There was sandflies everywhere. Didn't have any food or nothing, They go get a drink out of the river. And, it wasn't... But they would tell you today, they would still remember,
Yeah. Well, I've actually got something that Catherine was quoted as saying. She said, "You see, what my father has lacked in traditional father-daughter discipline and stability, he's more than made up for in providing me with one-off experiences, adventures, thousands of introductions, and endless surreal tales that I could tell. With Dad, I'd often get picked up in his Kingswood ute at a moment's notice, and before I knew it, we'd be out in the midst of back and beyond, picking up deer carcasses, dropping off fuel cans, or off in the helicopter on some mission I never questioned. But, she went on to say, he always smells of aviation fuel and expensive aftershave. He always has the phone pinned between his ear and his shoulder. He's always helping someone, dropping off fruit and veggies to anyone who appreciates it. There's always something slow cooking in the camp oven on the multi-fuel fire, smelling heavenly. He's always on a mission from one town to the next, and he's always kind and generous to a fault.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
She obviously appreciates who you are.
Yeah, well, I think my other boys would too. Yeah, because Mark, he finished up getting a skip on a friend of mine's fishing boat out of Riverton, the crayfishing out near the Songler Islands. He got all the skipper's tickets, which he's still got today. And then I had a helicopter, Hughes 300, and I asked him if he wanted to learn to fly on it, and he said he would. So I give him that till he got all his licenses, and I sort of set him up that way, I guess. I've done the same with a grandson.
Yeah. So your son and your grandson both fly, and your brother.
Yeah, no, both use helicopters for that I owned, you know. And so they got a bit of a kickstart, and at that time when they learnt to fly, they'd already probably spent several hundred hours with me shooting deer, because I had my grandson shooting deer and my son shooting deer. So they got to know, no dual control. They don't have to have dual, but they could see what I'm doing and how we're handling it and all that sort of stuff. You know?
Yeah, and it's got to become part of their DNA too, I suppose, isn't it? Can I talk about the Sports Illustrated article?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a raw nerve or not, but...
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've got it, yeah.
Oh, you've got it, yeah.
So most people won't know about this, but in 1974 there was an article published by American Sports Illustrated magazine. And it was about...
Jones.
Yeah, Robert F. Jones.
I've got a copy of it.
Right. It was about deer culling in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I got caught out a bit there. He must have come into town here, and I was with Gary Holes. A few of us were down the pub there, and he must have checked up around town and found out that there's only a couple of guys doing it around here, and one was Bill Black and Roy McIver and myself. And someone must have pointed and said, "Oh, there's Dick Deaker over there. You can't have a yarn to him. He's out there shooting them all the time." And he took me into taking him up the Milford track here, you know, which I did. But he had a photographer with him, George Silk. And the Sports Illustrated at the time, because Tim got right up me when he heard about the thing. I hadn't seen the article, but Tim had. And he showed it to me. He said, "Have you seen this?" And I couldn't believe what I was reading, you know.
So just to put people in the picture, they obviously came over here with an agenda. Yeah. Because in the States, you know, hunting from helicopters is
taboo,
and completely unsportsmanlike. So I just want to read out a couple of paragraphs that give sort of the slant of what the article read like. For years, the New Zealand government has considered the deer a pest. Now gunship meat hunters, answering to the clamour for venison, may send the buck the way of the buffalo. So here's a few sort of random paragraphs. Today, a pall of doom hangs over the country, compounded of gun smoke, gasoline fumes, and the reek of fly-blown deer guts. Very emotive language. Fiordland is turned into a nightmarish battleground, and a Antipodean cross between the late air war in Vietnam and the slaughter of the American buffalo herd a century ago. The image of 10 or 12 deer, open-bellied and round-eyed in death, dangling from a chopper's cargo hook, the stag still in velvet, the hinds with their unborn young tucked efficiently in their eviscerated body cavities, has stolen much of the joy from the country. So you just got involved by accident.
Well, yeah, yes, I did. And anyway, he was a very likeable dude, and his professional photographer he had with him, George Silk, Silk, was quite a famous photographer in America. I found out later. And Tim Wallace told me that there was about 3 million of those things printed at the time, you know.
And this caused huge fallout sort of between the New Zealand government, right?
Well, it was sort of, but George Silk actually phoned me up. He apologised to me. He said, but Dick, I just did the photography. I had no idea what he was writing until I read it myself. And it was an art.
Right.
He wrote it to sell it. And he said he would have got very well, he said Jones would have got very well remunerated for what he wrote. He wrote a very emotive thing that obviously Sports Illustrated thought, well, this is a good story, we'll stick it in there with a whole lot of all this stuff. And but I had no idea that he was going to do something like that.
Do you think he came over with that agenda right from the start to do that?
Looking back, and even George Silk said that he no doubt wrote that story to sell the story, you know, and there's a lot of stuff in there. Because he came with us as well, as we had a boat up there, up at the head of the lake, actually, the head of Lake Tiana, the Milford Track area, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, Tim went off his rocker big time, which I can understand, you know.
There's so much bad publicity for everyone.
Well, but at that stage, I'd never seen the story.
Right.
But eventually I got a copy.
Was he upset with you personally for getting involved?
Well, he was upset with me. He was upset about the story because about half of it was bullshit to sell the story.
And did you have any contact with Robert F. Jones after
Never,
that?
no. Only George Silk.
Wow.
He died about 10 years ago, and I saw in the Time magazine, actually, there was a write-up about him, you know, like he was quite famous over in America as a famous photographer. You got to remember, photography then, there was no digital stuff. It was just, and he did send me a whole lot of slides, which I've got somewhere, because he was always on the camera going for it, you know, like lots of, you know, and changing film and more stuff, you know. But that was his job, to get the stuff, all the good shots for Robert Jones, you know.
Yeah, because they came out with you on the chopper, didn't they?
I didn't take Jones. I might have just took him for one look around, and it was just in behind Glade House in the Milford Track.
Yeah.
And then George Silk went with me and got quite a few photos, a lot of photos actually.
There's a couple of statements in there as part of this article made by you, which I assume they're correct. Maybe they're not, but seems like you're showing sympathy for the deer, for how they're being shot up, even though you're in the industry of doing it. But we're sitting with Ken and Marg Tustin last night discussing the whole industry and how it's actually very deep. It's just such a complex subject of the whole culling and the live capture, and how it's a commercial operation, but it's actually saving the forests in the long run. There's a lot of angles to it. So with that in mind, I just quite like to read out this paragraph and get your take.
Who wrote it?
It was in the article, so Robert F. Jones wrote it, but he's quoting you. You're talking about the deer. There's a poor little bugger out there somewhere that will bloody starve. What a poor thing it is to shoot at them at this time of year. Do you remember saying this?
Yeah, would have done.
Yeah. Then he looked at the ground, poking his boot through the tussock for old deer droppings. They were everywhere. These droppings are 6 or 8 years old, he said. That's you. You can see how many deer there were then. Look at these deer here. And he kicked the stag. They're all ratty. Rats is what they are. Not at all fit, because we harass them so they can't bloody eat. There were better bloody heads in the old days. How can a bloody deer get a chance to live a good life when any joker can buy a helicopter and start hunting anytime he wants? So I just found that interesting, because you're sort of saying the opposite to what you're doing. You obviously had some...
but I had a job. I enjoyed flying. We had to shoot hinds because of, Tim wouldn't know how many deer you got. We knew that when you got them on the gut heap, they got big milk bags on them. I knew there's a fawn sitting out there and it's going to starve to death, And it's similar with the 1080 stuff. I could introduce you to people like Graeme Scobie from Wyndham, who has come across a hind that's been partially poisoned with 1080, and it's standing out there and it's quivering and there's stuff running out of its mouth. In 2 days after a 1080 drop, and it's been standing there and you could walk up to it, he's seen them, and you've got to think, look, I'm not a cruel person with animals.
No, and I think that's the point. People look at what you were doing and think, well, they're cold-hearted, they're just killers, but you're actually not. You're doing a job, and you still have some sympathy there.
Yeah. Well, if I didn't do it, someone else would do it. I like the flying. It's like airline pilots today. The average airline pilot, they do the New York to London run. They burn 100,000 litres of fuel for the 7-hour flight per plane, and when they get there, someone else flies that plane back. So that's 200,000 litres of fuel that's burnt for one day, and there's dozens of them in the air at any one time. And then you pick up the paper about how fossil fuels are destroying the earth, and it's full of people that are just going away somewhere to have a holiday.
It's very true.
They're doing nothing productive for the world, and
couple of other statements that just interesting, because they just show the way it was back then. When you're asked, why do you keep doing it? This is what you're quoted as saying: beyond the money, if I'm to be perfectly honest, there's the thrill of it. Where else is this kind of thing possible in a world that's slowly going soft? It's bloody adventure, that's what it is. That's come to be a kind of silly word, I suppose, but it still means something.
Yeah, well that's right. And
you guys were young, all full of testosterone and helicopters,
full of
and
it, big time,
lots of money. I mean, that's the context of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was exciting. It was on the borderline of exciting, but every day you knew it was dangerous.
Yeah.
Because every few months back in the 70s, did you hear about so-and-so that killed, or there was 2 of them killed, and these are people you had a beer with only a few days before. But down the track, it led me, I finished up, once the deer thing went, I finished up flying a bit in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. I spent 3 whole summers in northern British Columbia, and about 3 years back and forward to Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, month on, month off. I had a pretty good run out of it, like for a dumbass that can't even bell properly, like I'm still write letters and I make mistakes. I'm asking people all the time, I was asking my granddaughter the other day how to spell it. It was a simple word. And she said, don't you know, Granddad? And I said, no, I told you but I'm quite happy about it,
Different subject. There's a story I read of you sitting in the Moose Bar here in Te Anau, not so long ago, looking at a photo with a whole lot of guys, and it dawned on you that everyone was dead except you.
Yeah.
And just thinking about, the number of friends that you and others have lost in the industry. Just wonder if we could talk about a couple that seem to mean a lot to you. One is Gary Hollows.
Yep.
So he was tragically killed in 89, I think.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. You were overseas.
I was in Canada at the time, yeah.
I
was flying along.
tell me about what you were doing and the effect it had on you? Because you spent
I was actually moving drilling equipment in the mountains in northern British Columbia, not far from the Alaskan border, and we did a lot of flying up there. Used to do about 500 hours in 4 months of flying. And I was flying along, and I got a message to call Richard Hayes and Tiana urgently. Well, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Like I'm talking, and I had drill moves to do. You know, guys want diesel here and core samples taken out here and move this drill here and there. And I fitted it in that I managed to get about half an hour, and I shot down to a little town called Stewart, which was on the Alaskan border. And I phoned Richard Hayes, and he told me, and when you get told something like that, and he told me what had happened, you know, and it's sort of, you know, you know, all of a sudden someone you've had a lot to do with for 20, 25 years, you know, on a close basis, you know, take you away, you know, hunting up the lake and just general hunting around. And he was with George Silk when that was all written up. I was like being hit with a bloody mallet, you know, like I was sort of stunned, you know, but I still had a lot to do, work to do for the rest of the day. You can't leave guys sitting on the side of the mountains up in the middle of nowhere, and doesn't matter where you are in that northern BC, as far as the eye can see in all directions there's mountains, you know, and you've got commitment. So I had to keep going, and it was, you know, it brought a tear to my eye, you know.
Absolutely, and such a tragic way to go as well, you know.
Yeah, that's right, and then I didn't find out till later when Mark told us exactly what happened. He was with his brother's body for about 8 hours before they found it. And the Kias were eating them, you know. And he probably told you, I think he shot either 16 or 18 or something like that, Kias, and he kept one bullet for himself, you know.
Wow.
He didn't tell many people that, but that's a fact. I know his brother knows that, and you know, you're in a pretty bad state when it's like that, you know. Like
the other one that really seems to have made an impact on you was Morgan Saxton's death.
Yeah, it did, because I knew his father very well. I had a lot to do with him over a long period, and he was a really nice guy. Everybody loved him. And I knew him since you know, a little baby. I knew his mother and father well. I had a lot to do with him, and he was he had a great personality, you know, and he was doing well. He was a good little pilot, and it's not all that long ago. It would have been in the last 20 odd years, I think, now probably.
Yeah,
but. I think I'd stayed with him only a couple of days before, and he had a wee flat apartment, and a lot of girls loved him, you know, like he was a single boy, living the dream, neat and tidy. I went into his house, and he said, "Stay in my house." And he told me where it was, and Wanaka, and I went in there, and you could tell it had a woman's touch to it, you know. Like everything was beautifully done, and everything was neat and tidy. Go to where the towels are, and it's just too good for you know, a man wouldn't do this, you know. And I used to have him on. I say, "You got a bloody woman sneaking around here, Morgie," and he'd always deny it, but he always
it was obvious.
but we'd laugh at each other about it, you know. But he actually was neat and tidy, because his father was a bit scruffy,
right?
And his huts and that was, you know, like pretty rough, you know, like sort of 3 out of 10, you know, stuff flying everywhere, and you know, a dirty old bed over there with a sleeping bag like I had. Just slept in it for 5 years without cleaning it, you know. And but yeah, no, he was there's a few people like there's others too, Barry guys, there's a few of them. Yeah, they affected you, but you get used to it, like deaths. We've all got death coming to us, whether you like it or not, but it's just sad to see younger people going down in things that never needed to happen,
And I don't know, might not be like this for you, but it seems harder when someone goes tragically in an accident that might be a nasty accident, as opposed to someone dying of natural causes, sort of maybe like Mark Hollow's. I know it's still, real rough for family and friends, but is it different, when someone goes in an accident and it's a complete shock?
Yeah, well, it is, because, like if you die on natural causes, like you're usually older, but certainly an accident. I could be sitting here with you today, and tomorrow somebody phones me up and says you just got killed. Somebody run you over down here, and it's pretty hard. It's hard on you.
Yeah, it's too soon, isn't it?
Yeah.
There was a review of the Hollows Boys book written by Tony Orman.
Oh yeah.
Which is interesting because it talks about the crazy times in the helicopter flying. So I'll just read that. So in the Mountain Scene interview, Peter Carey, who wrote the Hollows Boys, said she wanted to provide an accurate portrayal of the venison recovery era in Fiordland. Every other book that has been written about it was kind of, oh, look at us, jolly ho, we're the cowboys, aren't we legendary, said Peter. Then she added, there's nothing legendary about it. I couldn't agree more, said Tony Orman. It was just nuts, and it's difficult to comprehend why anyone would knowingly take risks and flirt with danger and even death, but I guess the adrenaline-saturated addiction was irresistible. Some involved in near-death accidents couldn't wait to get back hunting the next day. As I said, it was just nuts.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with Tony. I know Tony quite well, and I communicate with him quite a bit, by phone or email. But yeah, I don't reckon it was dangerous what we did. The most dangerous thing is you had to look after your machinery. A lot of guys they sort of, they just kept flying and didn't seem to get many checks done. And that's one thing I will say about Tim Wallace. He never, ever said, I want you to be, mindful of the fact about flight time and all that. He said, if you're producing deer and that, he said, just keep going. Don't worry about the hours you do. Everything goes down. There's always plenty of fuel there. But some other guys sort of thought they'd crib a bit of stuff, here and there. And I honestly don't think it was all that dangerous. But
and I've actually got some little one-liners that you've said in various places. So, deer recovery is safe. It's only as dangerous as you make it. Every day I hop in one, I treat it like the first day I went out with Don Sparry. If I'm not happy with something or I hear a noise, I'd always land and get someone to have a look at it. You always have an option to stop and go home. Those who frequently took shortcuts eventually took one too many.
Yeah, no, you're right. A lot of guys, I'd still say it wasn't a dangerous job. You lived in the dead man's curve, which you know what it is, all the time. In that time I went up the South Arm and I convinced myself I wasn't sure whether that fuel oil cap was on or not. I was probably 5 minutes away from killing myself. If you've got a bad inkling about something, check it, go and check it. Some guys, their helicopters were falling to bits and they still keep flying them,
Yeah.
And that used to occur quite a bit,
You did a few seasons overseas, as you mentioned, and I'm sure we could go on forever about that, but a couple of things. In British Columbia, you did some bear relocations.
Yeah, well, you had to.
Which is a real different sort of wild animal recovery.
Yeah, well, what was happening in some of those high mountainous areas, that the geologists and that have huts, quite nice huts, and they board up the windows for the winter, you know, for the only use them about 4 or 5 months a year, you know. You go up to the hut there and the place has been destroyed. A big beard pull, you know, they make a hole in the place and then they smash the windows. And I've seen what a bear does inside a hut. You wouldn't believe the mess they make. They get tins. There'd be all these tins, tin fruit, tin fish, tin everything, and they crush the tins like they crush a tin of fish and crush it and the juice come out of it, but just teeth in it. I should have actually bought one back, but it would be just all crumpled up, but and then they'd be on the next one and they're just lying everywhere and things are smashed, the cupboards are all wrecked. So they get the okay off the game and fish or whatever they call them, government department, and they want to catch these bloody things.
What sort of machine are you in?
D models, 500 Ds, and would take 2 or 3 of them and they'd fire darts before you even got anywhere near them. I'd be yelling at the guy, "Don't shoot the thing yet," you know, because you had to be here to the sink away, you know, like you had to be right on top of them because that dart comes fizzing out the barrel. You can see it coming out. And they'd fire 2 or 3 and miss them. You know, the darts would fall short. I said, "We got to get closer. We got to get closer. I'll tell you when," you know. But we'd fill them up we'd put romping in them, and there'd be a grizzly mum and her babies. But I didn't know at the time. But when you did get them, you got them, but you never put antidote in them. You'd take them in a net, but you had to they're like cats. The bears are the same apparently. So if you catch the bears here, you better drop it over in the Greenstone Valley or somewhere a long way away. And I said, if you're going past here in a week or two's time, just see if they're still there. If they're still there, they've obviously died.
Yeah.
They're always gone.
Right.
You'd tell them next time you saw the guy, say, "Oh, I flew past that place where we dropped them." And they're gone, you know, they're gone. But they'd take them with us. There's a lot of marmots, you know, there's little marmots like living, because there's plenty of food there.
Yeah. In 1993, you had an accident in Mexico, which was a bit of a life-changing event. Yeah. What work were you doing?
I was doing seismic work for oil and gas.
Yeah.
You're running these big long lines out of where they had drilling holes into the ground, but all day long you were flying up and down the line from one end, about 50 miles long, 50 k's long roughly. So most of your flying every day was at about 500 feet from the back of the line to the beginning of the line, and there'd be another line a kilometre away, more lines, you know, so 3 helicopters going up and down these lines all day long. So all day long you're flying along at about 500 feet with something. It was bags of equipment, electronic equipment and wires and cables and servicing drill rigs with diesel and moving the diesel engines, you know, every few days. So all day long you're going up and down the line. But every now and then you had to pick up these bags after they'd shot the holes. They'd drill these holes down about 15 metres and a signal comes out, you know, when the explosives in there, you know. And they could tell what was underneath, you know. But the guys running were Canadian guys out of Calgary, running it. They didn't know whether there's oil there or not, but there's geologists that look at it and it's a pattern of the shock from the explosion. It goes down and it tells and how it bounces back, tells them what's down there, whether it's water or oil or gas or what. Well, I've done lots of days of 10 hours, non-stop, all day long, up and down the pay. But at each end of the line, you have to pick, every now and then you got to pick these bags up. And then they go along another 400 or 500 metres, lower in the bush, and a carousel with a whole lot of hooks on it. And next thing there's this explosion, you know, boom, you know, and stop, you know, but I'm hovering over the bush. All day long you're going up and down at 500 feet, so you're out of the dead man's curve. If the motor quits, you dump your road and, you know, somewhere to land, you know. But when you're hovering over the bush at 150 feet, just lowering into the bush, and there's Mexicans underneath you, 2 or 3 of them. And I tell you what, you wouldn't believe how quick you come down when you're not moving forward. I've got a heavy load on board. Your collective's right up, and it just goes boom. Luckily, I was on my own. And anyway, I come down through these trees, and, about that round, the blades chopped them up as I was going down, and I busted this here, and my legs hanging out the side, and all you could hear was hissing noises. In a Bell Long Ranger, the second fuel pump, you had to pull a circuit breaker to stop it. And I'm lying on the side, and this arm here got quite badly damaged. And I couldn't pull the circuit breaker, and I could see his fuel squirting everywhere, and you hear the noise and smoke and stuff. I thought, I'm going to get cooked. I'm going to get fried here. And I looked, and about here to that cabin away, there's a couple of Mexicans, and they're looking around the tree like this. They're hiding behind the tree, and they're looking at me, and I'm going like this. Look at that smoke and jet fuel running all over the place, I've got to get out of this bloody thing, And they came over and to help me drag me out, and I was trying to tell them how to, because I didn't speak no English, how to pull a circuit breaker. When I got them to pull one of the mass of more, pull, and eventually got the one that was making it go, Anyway, and they propped my leg up on a rock, and to straighten it out a bit. But I didn't feel much pain, I never seemed to feel pain at all. And but it just didn't look right, my leg hanging out the side here, and I didn't know what had happened. I'm talking 1 minute after it happened,
But you stayed conscious right through?
Oh, yeah, all the way, and I got to get my bag, and I had a camera in there, and I said, photo, get them to take some photos of me lying there, because I thought, this is the enemy flying, I'll never fly, because I've heard of guys had crashes before and head injuries and that was it. No more, So I did get a lot of photos, and the main reason I got them to take them, I thought, well, I can always prove that I didn't get knocked out,
Right.
So that was a bit of a highlight in my life, but it certainly was totally unexpected. We were enjoying ourselves down there. It was quite rigorous work, but we got very well paid.
How long did it take you to get back flying after the accident?
About 18 months. I couldn't see out of my eyes for several days, and I could only see if I'd locked my eye off. Otherwise, I was seeing double.
Right.
Finish up, I'm in a hospital, and I'm lying, and I felt like spewing. And I said, I can't spew, get me a bucket. And of course, the nurses hadn't a clue what I'm talking about, and I didn't, but they didn't know. And I'm going up, and next thing out she came, and so they scattered then. And of course, I didn't know anything until the next day. I woke up, I must have had me doped out after he fixed my thing up, my leg up, a guy there. At that night, I woke up and I couldn't see out my eyes because my head's all bruised up and swollen up, And all I could hear, I couldn't see anything. All I could hear was babies crying. I could hear these babies crying, like babies, I thought, oh, geez, I'm not a religious man, I'm not religious, but I'm not religious. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, this guy that patched me up, he was a Mexican doctor who'd been trained in Texas, and he spoke good English, and he said, oh, you're in a maternity home here. He said, this is a private maternity home, and you hear babies crying. I thought, I'm a goner, or maybe I'm in heaven, or maybe, honestly, it was.
Baby
anyway,
heaven.
After a few days, I sort of came right. And I've got a photo somewhere, there's about 6 nurses came in, not one spoke a bit of English. I knew a bit of Spanish. the nombre, they wanted to know my name. I said, my name's Dick Deaker. And they all started laughing. They all started laughing and giggling. They all stand there with their nurse's uniform on or badges and all that shit. No, this is no bullshit. Yeah, and my name's Dick. And of course, in the Spanish language, there's no such thing as a dick. Well, there is a thing as a dick. A dick's a dick. And only men have dicks. And of course, I said, my name's Dick. And of course, they all started laughing amongst each other. But in the finish, I said, oh, yeah, Richard, you know, so they called me Ricardo, you know, Ricardo.
Oh, yeah. So did you come back to New Zealand to recover?
No, I finished up in Canada in a hospital up there.
Oh. And when you next went flying, was that back in
Mexico?
Mexico?
Oh, a long time later, a year later.
Back in Mexico?
It might have been 2 years later. They said, do you want to fly? I said, I would. They said, well, we just bought a new Long Ranger, and we got 2 engineers courses and 2 pilot courses at Bell, Fort Worth. Would you go there? And I said, I would. And I'd already done about 1,500 hours in Long Rangers. So I went there and I sat in the classroom for 3 days. And you won't believe it, even after doing about 1,500 hours before this happened, I actually learnt a lot there that I never knew. I've been flying around this thing and never knew a lot of things I never knew.
Wow.
And they taught you.
Yeah.
And then they had a helicopter to take you up there to do some order rotations. And I hate doing them in the best of times, even with and the guy wound the throttle right off. And he left it right off. And he said, and he showed, and he did one onto tar seal runways with the throttle right off, all the way down, and all the skidding along the ground. Oh, I can't do that. I've got to do a power recovery. No, easy, Dick, easy. So, but it was all right for them. They were doing it all the time. These are ex-military pilots. I spent about an hour in a simulator to land at a hangar, and I hit the hangar, crashed at the hangar. So they turned the bloody machine off when I crashed the bloody thing, you know.
Bloody Kiwis.
Eh? Yeah, dumb Kiwi, yeah. When I finished that, they had another Long Ranger there, and I ferried it from, and this was be about 1995, and it had a GPS in it, but there was no manual. It was on a Sunday, and they said, we'll have it all ready for you. It'll be outside. You just get a taxi from your hotel out there, and it's all ready to go. And I go there, and there's a GPS in there, but there's no maps, no nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just the flight manual. And they wanted me to take it from there, Fort Worth, down to south of Monterey, about 100 miles south, where we used to work down there. Anyway, this GPS then, I looked everywhere. No, I didn't know how to work them anyway. They were just new out. It was 30 years ago. And I thought, stuff it, with no maps, no nothing. And I got a trucker's bloody map, a trucker's map of Texas and bloody down into Mexico, you know. And I tell you what, it worked good. Because I-35 runs right through the middle of Fort Worth, I-35, and that goes through Laredo, goes through San Antonio. But I had no airways stuff or nothing. And I thought, well, but the company I worked for out of Canada, they had a couple of people that they'd said, we've got this guy turning up, can you fuel him up? You know, and I said, he's a dumb Kiwi, you know, and I'm just going on the straight I-35, and there's a railway line, goes right from Fort Worth, it goes down to Laredo, it goes to Monterey, the same railway line after it gets into Mexico, and it goes right down to where I worked. So I did 9 hours flying that day, and I got down there just on dark, but stopping at all these different places just with my road map. And just to make, I'd skirt I had no airways thing, I didn't know nothing. You'd see these airliners heading in, and it must be the big airport over there, you know, San Antonio Airport. So I'd take a big wide berth around them at 500 feet or 400 feet, and then I'd get around the other end, I'd catch up with the railway line again, and I-35, and I'd get right down near and I could see the big board, you know, and it would say Laredo, buddy, 120 miles or something. You know, okay, yeah, it's steaming along, I'm on my own, you know, with a road map.
Flying IFR.
IFR all the way, IFR all the way, yeah.
You gained a lot of knowledge about Takahe when you're in the Murchisons.
Well, I spent 500 days and nights over there.
Yeah. You used to chase and catch the Takahe so they could be tagged.
Well, that's what Don Merton used to get me for. When they were coming in to do an annual thing, he would ask the forestry guys, can we use Dick Deaker for a couple of days, because he's fit bastard, you know. Well, I was only in my early 20 or 20 odd. And they used to band them and weigh them and muck around with them, you know.
Mm. And they were quite common to see them.
Yeah, they were, yeah. We used to document them. One day I saw 13 different ones.
Wow.
But that included chicks. There was a couple had 2 chicks.
Mm.
Well, little chicks, about that high. Yeah, they were common, and Kiwis.
But they were presumed extinct in around 1948, weren't they?
That's right, yeah. But that was quite remote country then. A lot of people never got in there.
Yeah, in your book, which was published 15 years ago, thereabouts, you were pretty critical about, you know, how the birds have been managed and not being removed from their habitat before it was too late. But if you look at the DOC website now, they say there's about 500 birds.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise
so
me.
there's been quite a bit of recovery, around 240 put back in the Murchisons, and the rest are in the Greenstone and Rees Valleys, I think. So, I mean, there has been some recovery finally, hasn't there?
Because there was another thing too. In the early 70s, I got involved with a lot of the original Kakapo programs in Milford, in the Gulliver and the Don and the Tutaco and the Sinbad. There was Takahe and Kakapo and all those valleys. The Wildlife Division, Internal Affairs, did anything to do with them, and they had big gangs going in there. And there'd be places in there I've got 5 hours flying in one day, and that's in the days when they could still hear them. You could hear them at night, but they couldn't get them. They were trying to catch some to breed them, but the park sport of the day wouldn't allow them to bring them out.
Yeah,
and there was a lot of tragic stuff happened back then. You know, today they've got breeding programs going, but then they were trying to get breeding, but there was this internal scrapping, and as a result, the Takahe, the Kakapo, actually, some of those programs were suffered big time, and in fact, it is documented that they had some of the Kakapo they caught. At least 1 or 2 had to be taken back to where they came from.
Crazy, eh?
It was crazy, and they're never to be seen again.
Yeah.
Anyway, back in the mid to late 70s, I'm landed, because I dealt with, as a young fellow, when I went up in that first the bloody bell up to Sinbad, I knew what Kakapo bowls were like. I was with Dave Stack with the Internal Affairs Department, and we're up there. And I got to know what the track and bowl systems were like. And up in the, in the Tutaco high benches there was a couple of places there I could land, and I could see, I've seen these track and bowl systems. But back in the late, when I got into Hughes 500s, Jeff Carter and I were gutting some deer out at the mouth of Doubtful Sound. And when I'm landed there, and I'm walking around, I thought, this is Kakapo, very track and bowl system, fresh, like fresh airs. So I come out and I got hold of Don Merton.
Well, I actually found an article out of the press in December 1978, so that'd be the time. And it said that Kakapo have now been positively identified in the remote area north of Doubtful Sound. Previously, only 10 birds were known in Fiordland. Mr. Nilsson went into the area on Thursday with rangers from the Fiordland National Park, and the man who reported the sign, Te Anea helicopter pilot Dick Deaker. But it says the birds were not likely to be moved from the area, but they would be studied.
That's exactly what happened. Don Merton tried to get some out of there. They tried. there's been a lot of very bad decisions made by government agencies, and they're very lucky they've managed to cut it off. And I believe they may have 200 or 300 of them now.
Yeah.
But they haven't got a good breeding program. All of them somewhere down the track are inbred, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I read is by the early 90s, there were 51 Kakapo remaining.
That'd be right, yeah.
But they've got a bit of a breeding program going, and now there's about 230, 235.
That'd be right, yeah.
But they're only on protected offshore islands. You know,
That's
they're
right,
not
yeah.
in the wild and in sanctuaries. A lot of the recovery is sort of hampered by inbreeding now because, you know, there's not too many to breed from.
And that's where Don Merton was really angry about particularly about that lot that I found come across out on Doubtful.
Yeah.
He was angry about that. It was from a different location, you know.
Mm.
And of course, I went down to Stewart Island a few times too. When Bill Black couldn't do it for some other reason, I went down there, and I actually saw a Kakapo skeleton that had been eaten by a cat. And that's when I was working for Tim, so it had to be in the late 70s.
I just wanted to mention a bit about the last Kakapo that was removed from the Gulliver Valley, just because it's probably interesting to a lot of people.
It was taken back there.
And the one they called Richard Henry.
That's right.
Yeah, so he was removed in 1975. Fathered three.
I would have flown him out.
Would have you?
Yeah, I would have flown. Yeah.
He fathered 3 chicks, but he was named after the guy you mentioned, Richard Henry.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
I've just put together a little bit. I'll read it because it's real interesting. The guy, Richard Henry. So this is a little bit of his history. The local Kakapo population was thriving at the time. So this is in 1883. European explorer Charlie Douglas once wrote, Kakapo could be caught by simply shaking a tree or a bush until they tumbled on the ground, something like shaking down apples.
Yeah.
I've seen as many as half a dozen Kakapos knocked off one tutu bush this way. Well, Richard Henry, in the late 1800s, meticulously studied the birds and their eating habits. With the introduction of weasels, stoats and ferrets, Henry witnessed the eradication of entire populations near his home. Over the next few years, Henry worked to save the declining species by rowing over 500 Kakapo to safety on Resolution Island in Dusky Sound.
That's a lot. That's
amazing. Rowing.
Yeah.
And its surrounding smaller islands. We start uphill among the ferns, always uphill, for the steeper it is and the denser the undergrowth, the better the Kakapos like it, he said. Henry built Kakapo pens on Resolution Island and Pigeon Island, some of which are still intact. Often working alone in wet and windy conditions, he pioneered capture techniques, experimenting with dogs and nets. He also proved that with the right conditions, birds could survive relocation. After 4 years of concentrated work, Henry focused on monitoring progress, relocating as necessary. He also devoted almost 2 years to search for the Takahe. But by 1900, he had become depressed about the threat posed by stoats and the island's birds. Unfortunately, the success of the translocation was short-lived as predators swum to Resolution Island in 1900, killing all of the Kakapo. Henry was bitterly disappointed by the failure of his Resolution Island efforts. And later,
you would be if you bought 500 of them. We're talking multiple trips across.
Yeah.
You know, he's got to catch them. He's got to put them in a cage, bring them over. He would have done. He'd probably done 100 trips back and forward. It'd be all rowing or
in all sorts of weather and pouring rain. He later left to become the ranger at Kapiti Island, moved to Auckland, became senile, and died alone in 1929. The Department of Conservation said the only person to attend his funeral was the postmaster. Just briefly, the story of the Takahe and the Kakapo that you've had a lot to do with is pretty interesting.
Well, it is. You've got to commend the dock department. They have. I think they've saved the species.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of long way to go yet, you know.
But someone said it's taken Doc 30 years, millions of dollars, blood, sweat, and
hundreds of
tears
millions
to get them to just over 200 individuals in 2019.
Yeah, that'd be right. Yeah, and but they're still there, and we've still got them. That's the main thing.
Yeah, that's right. Got a couple of last questions.
Well, yep.
If you had to pick one machine, fixed wing or rotary, that you enjoyed flying the most in all your life, could you do that?
Oh, yeah, the 500D was good to fuck. I did about 10,000 hours in 500s, and they were good. But I had a couple of engine failures in them, and they were beautiful. You know, they were a little sports car.
Yeah, it's amazing how
you could loop them. You could loop them.
Really? How do you know that?
Barrel roll. I haven't done a barrel roll on one, but I've watched one do one right beside me when it's flying along, a complete barrel roll upside down. I won't mention his name. He's still around.
Something you said about your life, you said, I wouldn't change anything. If I had it again, I'd do it all the same again. Apart from losing all my friends. It was so tragic and it never needed to be like that. How could it have been different? If it never needed to be like that, you know, how could it have been different?
Well, all the ones that friends that I've lost, they weren't, they were avoidable. You know, some people had different levels of safety, you know, like you had to be careful all the bloody time. But you did come up against engine failures and stuff in helicopters, and that's just a mechanical thing. Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd do it all again. But a lot of the guys that have had accidents, they shouldn't have even. There's places where deer run and chamois run and tar run, and you know it'd be ridiculous to shoot it there because you can't pick it up. So I've shot it in the most stupid place, and then they've gone to the trouble of easing into a hill.
So
most accidents are avoidable.
So what part did luck have to do with it all? Because, you know, there's a lot of engine failures that if you were at the wrong place at the wrong time, there's sort of nothing you can do about it.
You're living you're in a helicopter, you're living in a dead man. There's only half a minute to a minute before you're going to hit the ground, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. So is it 50% luck and 50% avoidable, or? There must be a lot of luck involved as to whether you lived or died.
It is luck, yeah. Yeah. We are.
When the engine fails.
Yeah, well, see, engine failures are a lot more common. I came up Milford Sound one time on a hiller, and I had nothing underneath. I must have been out there, dropped some people off. And halfway up the sound, it dropped the valve, so down to 5 cylinders instead of 6. And I didn't know how bloody. When you got 5 cylinders instead of 6, you don't lose 20% or 15% of it, bloody. You lose about bloody 80% of. I struggled to stay in the bloody air, cruising along. And you don't know that you've dropped because the vibrations are going right through the thing. You don't know whether the blades fall off or what the hell. The vibration and the noise, you know, what the hell's this? But you're in the middle of Milford Sound and you're only 1,000 feet up. You have no choice but to keep going, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're in a valley, I would have landed immediately. But I've got to get to the end of that airstrip, you know. And all it was a dropped valve. But you're down. I've had valve failures on 300s as well, you know. And you can't hover them when they're like that. And they don't tell you when they're going to stop, when they're going to drop them, you know. No. So a lot of it's luck. Yeah, luck. But a lot of those accidents over the years, no one really worked out what happened to Morgie Sax. But they seem to think it might have been mast bump or some bloody thing, because those Robbies weren't. It's evident, you know, if you get a mast bump, you're going to die, you know. Simple as that. Well, that's the way it appears to be, you know.
Yeah.
So, what's the next one?
That's it. It's over.
Right, lights out. Oh, it's out list.
It's over. It was a bit of a marathon, but
No,
you
it
know.
wasn't too bad.
Well, you know, you've done so much, and it's a shame to gloss over it all.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, well, appreciate you taking a day out for me.
Yeah,
and
it's a
to do
perfect
this.
day for it.